So I'm back. We've had a fantastic paleo week, this week in particular, because Nanotyrannus comeback apparently, as well as Goji sent a Spec Evo video on Disney's Carnotaurs moving into the Jurassic franchise. So this will be a fantastic stream. Let's just start up right away. I'm so hyped, bro.
Hello and welcome to 7 Days of Science, your weekly source for the latest science news. In the headlines this week, 2 new specimens of mummified dinosaurs have been discovered. A study has found that Australia's first peoples were collecting fossils. A new paper reveals some of the surprising diseases that may have stopped Napoleon's advance into Russia, and much more. Remember to check out our unboxing of the latest Curiosity Box in our Sword Dragon video, and the link in the description and the pinned comment below to get some fantastic scientific goodies for yourself, or indeed someone else.
Okay, now, as a paleontologist, I am always in need of a tape measure. There's got to be some Star Trek in there.
He's not going to let me forget about this. It's dripping quicker, look!
So let's see where the Edmontosaurus news starts.
In the early 19th, this dinosaur, Edmontosaurus annectans. Dinosaurs. These mummies are both examples of duck-billed dinosaurs. Our top story this week is the announcement of 2 fantastic new specimens of mummified dinosaurs. These mummies are both examples of duck-billed dinosaurs, specifically belonging to the species Edmontosaurus annectans. Mummified specimens of this dinosaur have been discovered before, back in the early 1900s, and the American Museum of Natural History and the Senckenberg Museum in Germany both display some stunning mummified fossils of this species.
Yeah. There's even a documentary on a Edmontosaurus mummy. So, chat, hello. Kaiju Kenjamin, hello, how are you doing? Yeah, I wanted to do this stream earlier, but I couldn't. Different time zones and stuff. It's always a topic, especially if you have viewers from the West.
Now though, 2 more examples have been described from Wyoming. One of these is a late juvenile, about 2 years old at the time of death, the first sub-adult dinosaur mummy ever recorded, and the other is an early adult aged between 5 and 8 years. Together, these stunning new mummified fossils reveal some incredible new details about the life appearance of these hadrosaurs, providing us with the best glimpse yet of what one of these dinosaurs would have looked like in the flesh. This species had a large, fleshy crest that began over the neck and extended across the back of these animals, which then transitioned into a low midline row of interlocking spikes. This row of
reminds you of Coryphosaurus, actually. Chat, Kaiju Kenjamin, I am doing good, how are you? Or should I say, good morning for me anyway. Yeah, for me it's actually afternoon. I'm doing quite fine. Still a bit struggling with a throat ache, but I think that's gonna be gone in like 2 days, so I can do some sports again. That will be huge.
Spikes then extended from the hip region and along the tail, gradually decreasing in height. This is a very interesting revision of Edmontosaurus annectans' life appearance, as previous reconstructions had shown these dinosaurs with a row of spikes running from the neck down the entire body, but these new mummies reveal that there were no spikes in front of the hips. These mummies have also shown that Edmontosaurus had hooves on its hind feet. Hooves had previously been reported on the forefeet of mummified hadrosaur remains, but it is now clear that the hind feet possess them as well. This paper is significant for several other reasons. The authors clarify what exactly the term mummy means when referring to such fossils, defining it as a mostly intact fossil skeleton covered by large areas of integument renderings. This term, integument rendering, is an important new definition that includes several modes of how fossil remains of soft tissue skin get preserved. Rather than calling the skin remains in these mummified fossils skin impressions, renderings is a more accurate description of how they formed, as they are not often actual impressions made in sediment. Instead, much of the skin in these specimens has been preserved as a thin external mask of clay, essentially templates of the skin formed from clay minerals. Finally, one of the other most exciting aspects
It's always great when you have these super high quality preservations, and now you're seeing that Edmontosaurus actually has some common traits or even more common traits with today's ungulates, and some traits for having resistant feet, which allows the animal to run even on hard terrain, probably very well. And you see a Tyrannosaurus can't catch an Edmontosaurus that easily, especially not during the day.
of this paper is that it establishes the location of a so-called mummy zone in east-central Wyoming. Using historical records, the researchers identified the precise sites where the original Edmontosaurus mummies were collected in the early 1900s, and also compared these with locations where other dinosaur mummies have been found, such as the Triceratops and a T-Rex specimen with some preserved soft tissues. All these mummies originate from the Lance Formation, dating between 70 and 66 million years ago, and all were discovered within the same 10-kilometer area. This mummy zone appears to be an especially promising site for future discoveries. Overall, this is a truly extraordinary discovery, and it's tremendously exciting to now have such a comprehensive understanding of how these dinosaurs appeared in life.
Yeah, I think the site also contains some Tyrannosaurus fossils. I think I've heard that on Raptor Chatters videos or one of these sites.
Also in the paleo news this week, a new study suggests that Australia's first peoples were fossil.
So this is what I don't find interesting here. Yeah, let's get back to dinosaur news.
In other prehistoric news, we have a new chapter in the long-standing debate over whether or not the dinosaurs were in decline before the infamous asteroid struck the planet 66 million years ago. Ever since researchers learned of the asteroid impact's role in the extinction, there's been disagreement over whether non-bird dinosaur diversity was in decline prior to this and the asteroid was the final blow, or if the asteroid was the main cause of the extinction. A big part of the problem with working out diversity trends around this precise time is because most of the studied fossil sites of this age are concentrated in the northern plains of North America. Therefore, it has been unclear whether the trends seen there are reflected globally. Now, new research has dated a site in New Mexico and modeled the diversity of dinosaurs there, finding that it dates to the very latest Cretaceous and maintained high levels of diversity right up until the impact. This suggests that dinosaurs were not in decline before the asteroid and were, in fact, still diverse and even partitioned into regionally distinct assemblages throughout the final hundreds of thousands of years of the Cretaceous. Also in
So, at least in North America, with abundant formations such as the Hell Creek, it is clear that the fauna was still very rich. So, oh, by the way, the paleontologists discovered a new species of Megaraptor.
the recent dinosaur news, a new species of sauropod dinosaur has been named this week. Paleontologists re-examined a fossilized brain case and partial skull roof in the collections of the Carnegie Museum of Natural History from one of these long-necked titans and realized that it belongs to a brand new species. Interestingly, this specimen was first collected in 1913 and was long thought to be from Diplodocus. However, this new research builds on decades of discoveries made about this iconic dinosaur, revealing that actually the fossil has several distinct characteristics that show it doesn't belong to Diplodocus. In fact, it is so different from all members of the Diplodocus family that it has been classified as a new species, Athenar bermani. This is another fascinating discovery, once again highlighting the importance of museum collections, as more than 100 years have passed since this fossil was collected, but thanks to its careful preservation, we can now recognize it as something new.
Yeah, that's a problem, I guess. There's so many fossils not being looked at, like in museum collections, and if you look at all these fossils, you will see hundreds and hundreds of species of already existing genera or genuses, or even the description of new genuses, just by looking at all these. So I would almost call them hidden fossils at this point, or forgotten fossils.
There's another new species of prehistoric reptile this week, a new kind of crocodiliform from the late Cretaceous of Egypt. Named Wadisuchus casibi, it's a type of croc known as a dirosaurid, a lineage of these ancient reptiles that is now entirely extinct, but that actually did survive the end Cretaceous mass extinction. Wadisuchus is an early diverging member of this lineage, helping to shed light on the origins of these particular crocs. It's known from 2 partial skulls and 3 partial mandibles, which show that it was quite a long-snouted croc that likely primarily fed on fish. It would have measured between
Yeah, now the measurement, let's see.
3.5 and 4 meters in total length, or around 11.5 to over 13 feet.
Quite a big fish eater then. Yeah, it has kind of a long snout, somewhat comparable to a gharial, or even some Pholidosaurs like Elosuchus and Sarcosuchus.
Living about 80 million years ago, Wadisuchus extends the known temporal range of the Dirosaurids back by several million years, showing that these crocs evolved even earlier than once thought, and showing that very early on, these predators evolved elongated snouts. And for our next new prehistoric species of the week, there's also...
Yeah, maybe it's gonna be shown here, let's see. Maybe also next Sunday.
also been a new kind of ancient rhinoceros named. It's a new kind of species of Arctic rhinoceros, which lived about 23 million years ago in what is now the Canadian High Arctic. Its bones were found on Devon Island in Nunavut, and it comprises a beautiful, almost complete skeleton. It's been named as a new species within the already established genus Epiceratherium, called Epiceratherium ichiluk. This is now the most northerly rhino species known to science. Epiceratherium ichiluk would have crossed into North America via the North Atlantic land bridge, which connected the continent to Europe. This is especially interesting as it was previously thought that this land bridge only facilitated dispersals up to around 56 million years ago, but the presence of this new Arctic rhino and its relation to other prehistoric rhinos suggests the land bridge was used for many millions of years after that. You may also remember that back in July of this year, we discussed a paper that extracted the oldest ever evolutionary informative protein sequences from an Arctic rhino. Well, this is that same specimen, so it's wonderful to be able to put a name to such a significant fossil. Next up, we have a very special story, as one of Ben's friends and fellow paleontology postgraduate, Kira Franklin, has published a paper naming several new species of prehistoric freshwater bivalves from Morocco.
I can't lie, I'm not watching this segment here. So they don't have Nanotyrannus here, it seems like. Let's look at the comments. Yeah. With all due respect to bivalves, by the way. Not that interested in that topic. Okay, yeah. Let's go to the Vividence video on Nanotyrannus then.
For decades, the majority consensus in dinosaur paleontology was that Tyrannosaurus rex was the only large-bodied theropod in its environment. Its hatchlings started out tiny, as all baby dinos did, and for the first 10 to 12 years of their lives were long-legged, slender, wicked-fast hunters. They were just so good at what they did that no other land carnivores in that 1-ton size class could succeed in such a competitive environment. But not everybody believed that. In 1988, a Tyrannosaur specimen previously assigned to Gorgosaurus was redescribed as a new taxon, Nanotyrannus lancensis, the pygmy tyrant from Lance. It was presented as a 1,000 to 1,500 kilogram speedy hunter that coexisted with Tyrannosaurus rex, focusing on the smaller animals of late Cretaceous North America. It had
and mid-sized animals, of course. Yeah, this would be the most deadly animal to us if we were to travel back in time. Alongside big many raptorants like Dromaeosaurs and juvenile Tyrannosaurus, and it is only in that list if it is actually a valid genus. We will see in this video, I guess. We will at least learn more.
longer arms than T-Rex and more teeth, distinguishing it from its much larger relative. But for decades, this was a fringe hypothesis, almost ridiculed as a conspiracy theory. The differences between the two animals were individual variation and changes that occurred during growth. The Nanotyrannus holotype and another referred, more complete specimen known as Jane were examples of juvenile Tyrannosaurus rex, nothing more, and to suggest otherwise was to make yourself a pariah in the paleontology community. But one incredible fossil changed everything. The dueling dinosaurs held at the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences is a historic find that was finally described in October 2025. The block preserved a young Triceratops found articulated with a Tyrannosaur, frequently cited as a juvenile Tyrannosaurus. Well, not anymore. With the description of the dueling dinosaurs, including an in-depth analysis of the 100% complete Tyrannosaur, we now know beyond a reasonable doubt that this animal was not a T-Rex. It's a Nanotyrannus lancensis, and its existence completely changes our understanding of the ecology of late Cretaceous North America.
Finally, boys. I just love my mid-sized predators, I can't lie.
First off, we need to discuss how it was decided that the dueling dinosaur's Tyrannosaur was not, in fact, a young T-Rex. I will be drawing heavily on the new paper by Lindsay Zano and James Napoli. It's also linked in the description, so I recommend you read it for yourself. The bones in the arms and hands. This was something I first saw for myself during my recent trip to the Black Hills Institute, where I saw Nanotyrannus claw and arm material next to that of adult Tyrannosaurus.
Jesus Christ. This Nanotyrannus is more similar in that regard to Dryptosaurus. It seems like he has, for his size, he has nice grasping hands. The question is that an adult T-Rex specimen, MOR 980 and PHY 6535? Because if it is, then Nanotyrannus seems to be a slasher. Even cooler. It's like a pseudo-megaraptoran, just like Dryptosaurus. And that also shows you that within Coelurosauria, megaraptorans and Tyrannosaurs are probably closely related.
The nanobones dwarf the corresponding elements in the T-Rex, even those of the giant Rex Sioux. I struggled to see how individual variation or ontogeny could account for such dramatic size differences there. As Zano and Napoli point out, bones don't shrink during growth, unless you're suggesting that T-Rex underwent a tadpole-like metamorphosis as a teenager where it reabsorbed bone and shrunk parts of its skeleton on its path to adulthood. A similar explanation would be required for the number of maxillary teeth, or teeth in the top part of the jaw. Nanotyrannus has 15 to 17 maxillary teeth, while T-Rex has, at absolute maximum, 12. We don't see teeth falling out and not growing back. We see that Nanotyrannus has more tooth sockets, something that doesn't change during ontogeny in vertebrates and is addressed in detail in another paper by Napoli from 2024, also linked in the description. As he points out in the 2025 paper, there are some theropod dinosaurs that lose their teeth in exchange for beaks, but traces of those teeth remain that can be detected with CT scans. Adult Tyrannosaurus doesn't have those traces, indicating that they always had the maximum 12 maxillary teeth, while Nanotyrannus always had 15 to 17. But of course, there's even more evidence than that. Nanotyrannus has a sinus, or air pocket, inside the bone of its quadratojugal, which is at the top part of the back of the jaws. Tyrannosaurus doesn't have that sinus, and sinuses don't disappear during growth, instead getting bigger. Napoli's research on crocodilian ontogeny bears that out. Nanotyrannus has 35 tail or caudal vertebrae, as opposed to T-Rex's 42 to 43. Add to that the fact that the dueling dinosaur's Nanotyrannus, Bloody Mary, even has a vestigial third finger on its hand, something else not present in Tyrannosaurus. And then the idea that we've so carefully cultivated of T-Rex juveniles being slim murder string beans until their teenage years suddenly comes crashing down. Oh yeah, and histological analysis showed that Bloody Mary was 14 years old, being very conservative, and at least 20 years old using similar standards from other Tyrannosaur histology papers. It was fully grown when it died, only reaching about 700 kilograms as opposed to the 9,000 plus you'd expect for a fully grown Tyrannosaurus.
Okay. So there are some differences between Nanotyrannus and Tyrannosaurus rex. Well, most notably the teeth, I guess.
The paper itself definitely puts it, even in the absence of histological evidence indicating that several Nanotyrannus specimens were in the asymptotic growth stage at death, the proposed character transformations in this taxonomic scenario cannot be attributed plausibly to ontogeny. And Nanotyrannus lancensis isn't the only nanospecies either. Calm down, take a deep breath. The Nanotyrannus holotype is from the Lower Hell Creek Formation and belongs to Nanotyrannus lancensis. Bloody Mary is from the Lower Hell Creek Formation and belongs to Nanotyrannus lancensis. And Jane, the specimen treated as a juvenile rex in growth and biomechanical studies for the past 20 years, is from the Upper Hell Creek Formation and belongs to Nanotyrannus lithaeus, a totally new species coined by Zano and Napoli. The species name lithaeus refers to the Lethe River from Greek mythology, which was a river of forgetfulness that symbolizes Jane being reborn as a new species. The two species are still extremely closely related, separated by some osteological characters across the skull, verts, scapula, and limbs. The paper mentions body size as another separating characteristic of the two, with Bloody Mary at about 700 kilograms, while just about completely grown, while Jane was already 800 kilos with several more years of active growth to go. It is worth noting that the phylogenetic analysis from the paper places Petey, another specimen previously thought to be juvenile rex, as closer to Nanotyrannus lancensis, the holotype.
Nanotyrannidae, a new clade maybe, huh? Appalachiosaurus, also a speedy tyrannosaur,
type in Bloody Mary, then to Nanotyrannus lithaeus, Jane.
and Tryptosaurus, the goat.
Petey is also bigger than Jane, but was close to being fully grown at 900 kilograms. A projected fully grown Jane would have weighed about 1,264 kilos, according to the paper's new histological analysis, so Nanotyrannus may have gotten bigger as a genus over time. We're likely looking at a range of 700 to 1,200 plus kilograms for a typical fully grown Nanotyrannus, with a caveat. The paper calculated their mass estimates based on femur circumference, which, while useful for very rough comparisons, is nowhere near as precise as more advanced volumetric methods. However, Napoli has said that 3D models are in the works, which will give us a better idea of their actual size. The phylogenies that came about as a result of this discovery have some interesting implications. In one result, the tiny Tyrannosaur Moros intrepidus, which lived in Utah about 96 million years ago, clade most closely with Jane, or Nanotyrannus lithaeus. Moros was nearly fully grown at about 78 kilograms, possibly representing an early Nanotyrannid a tenth the size of later varieties, that originated from Asia and would have crossed over a land bridge about 100 million years ago. Another result indicated that Dryptosaurus and Appalachiosaurus were within the proposed family Nanotyrannidae, and that these long-armed, fast tyrannosaurs were from the eastern United States and crossed over to the Hell Creek Formation once the western interior seaway receded. However,
Cryptosaurus mentioned again. Yeah, my second favorite tyrannosaur after Albertosaurus, maybe even my favorite now, because he's got such resemblance to a Megaraptoran and is so big at the same time. A biter and a slasher, horrifyingly wonderful animal, or a horrifying and wonderful animal at the same time.
interior seaway receded. However it got there, we definitely have a non-T-Rex, extremely fast, powerful medium game hunter in the Hell Creek Formation. How fast, you may ask? A 2024 study by Boai and Swan examined the Jane specimen, now Nanotyrannus lithaeus, and suggested
There was something like 14 meters, 14.5 meters times 3.62 kilometers. So that makes it 36 would be 10, 15 would be 54. So somewhere in between like 52 and 54 kilometers per hour. Very fast.
Nanotyrannus lithaeus and suggested a top speed between 19.4 and 32.4 miles an hour, or 31 to 52 kilometers an hour. Given how biomechanical models from bones can't account for soft tissue structures that allow for higher speeds, I'd expect this animal to be even faster than calculated here, but either way, it would be a speed demon. I've seen Nanotyrannus described as the Prince of Hell, referencing the formation it was from, and I'd agree with that sentiment. It's a theropod up to 2 times the size of a polar bear, faster than the fastest Olympic sprinters, and with a bite of 5,600 newtons, strong enough to gouge through bone. So how
5,600 newtons? Not bad. Yep. And a slasher at the same time, it looks like.
How did this animal fit into the broader ecosystem of Hell Creek? For one thing, while Nanotyrannus has been suggested to be a pack hunter, I have yet to encounter evidence that suggests it hunted in large cooperative groups. It's certainly possible, but that would just be speculation. The paper suggests that the apomorphically hypercursorial hind limb proportions of Nanotyrannus suggest that this taxon was a pursuit predator, which may have preferred smaller, faster prey items than Tyrannosaurus. It may have specialized in the pachycephalosaurs and kidney-gnathids that were too fleet-footed for bigger predators to catch, chasing them down in the humid woodlands of Hell Creek. Young T-Rexes, on the other hand, appear to have been robust and heavily built from an earlier age, suggesting that they specialized in big prey from the beginning. They potentially could have attacked hadrosaurs and ceratopsians with help from their parents. Speaking of robust T-Rex, this paper provides circumference data for a T-Rex femur that had gone previously unmeasured. TCMI 2003-66-1 appears to have been an adult, still undergoing minimal growth when it died, with a minimum femoral circumference of 535 millimeters, increasing by a millimeter or so each year. We can't really calculate size effectively off a single measurement of a single bone, but it may indicate a size roughly comparable to that of the holotype, and would be the new smallest Tyrannosaurus that you can argue is skeletally mature, taking a spot from Trix. We do have remains of teenage T-Rex, including Bucky and Terry, as I discussed in my most recent video, and Lindsay Zano has implied that further research is appearing on the subject of juvenile Rexes. So no, there's not some mystery absence of juvenile Rexes. That isn't a thing, as Gregory S. Paul pointed out recently. I disagree with him on a number of points, but he's right in that the hand-wringing about a supposed dearth of young T-Rex specimens really just isn't supported by the available data. We've got them, now let's study them. What are your thoughts on Nanotyrannus, both Lancensis and Lithaeus?
Yes. Refreshing news, I have to say. If we travel back in time, I'm sure Nanotyrannus would consider us food. Absolutely. You look at Nanotyrannus now, you look at other predatory big and medium-sized Coelurosaurs and Abelisaurs, and you kind of get the roster of predatory dinosaurs that would hunt us. Big Dromaeosaurs, Nanotyrannus, other mid-sized Tyrannosaurs, Abelisaurs. Yeah, it would not have been nice. And even some crocodilians, or not crocodilians actually, to get the bigger, not the greater, to get the older group, the crocodilomorphs, like Caprosuchus in Africa, for example, the boar croc. So, is there gonna be anything more interesting here?
Yes. How does this change your understanding of the ecology of Hell Creek, and how do you imagine the two Tyrannosaur genera coexisted and competed with one another for 2 million years? I, for one, am extremely interested to find out more about the dueling dinosaurs, given that detailed descriptions will eventually be released. Paleontology as a field is accelerating so quickly that it's difficult to keep up with, and I love it. The more information there is about the amazing ancient life from this planet, the better. Thanks for watching. If you like dinosaurs and think they're awesome, you might enjoy checking out my book Extinction Obsidian Dawn.
Check that out if you're interested, guys. Obsidian Dawn. Also, bro's trying to gas me up with this Shilantasaurus graph and with the potential classification of a megatheropod megaraptorid. By the way, if you have the link for it, like a Twitter post or something like that, we can look over it together for the megaraptoran. Mr. Kaiju Kenjamin. So do you think at the end of when you're done, you think you have time to watch the video that I was talking about a couple of weeks ago? Sure, I guess. If I find it this time, I guess. I think I was too incompetent last time out. Koji Center's new video. This is gonna be so spicy.
Today, the alleged most dangerous island in Jurassic will be invaded by saurian horrors.
You will send a link in Megaraptor video. That's a good idea. Like the new, I don't know if it's gonna get filtered, but if you send the link, I can like filter in my YouTube studio and see the filtered comments as well. So we can do that. But if it's gonna be a Rick roll, my friend, so you're getting manhunted. You know, jokes aside. But I can see it if you post it there. I guess it's a good idea.
Today, the alleged most dangerous island in Jurassic will be invaded by saurian horned killers. Debuting more than a quarter century ago in cinemas, we welcome back Disney's Carnotaur pair. The oversized, terrible twosome from the Mouse House will be put up against the monumental task of surviving, or perhaps taking over St. Hubert, the newest and allegedly the most dangerous island in the franchise. Can these two excel or go extinct again? Today on Koji Center, we'll study these Carnotaurs in detail, studying their anatomies,
Diablo as a name is diabolical.
again. Today on
Well, diabolically good.
Koji Center, we'll study these Carnotaurs in detail.
Carnotaurus robustus. It's actually comparable to T-Rex, no way. It's way bigger than a T-Rex. Can't be true. This thing weighs like 20 plus metric tons, no? The Carnotaurus.
Studying their anatomies, behaviors, and combat prowess to determine if they have what it takes to make it out alive or perish. First off, let's establish some info about what it is we are about to unleash. Believe it or not, what you saw in the film as the main antagonists were actually going to look very different. But there's a reason they look like this, and this massive. So earlier concepts for the movie that morphed into Disney's 2000 film Dinosaur had been brewing for many years before production and had some connective tissue as far as the 1980s with Jurassic Park's Phil Tippett making the short film Prehistoric Beast. Early drafts of the movie Dinosaur had Tyrannosaurus Rex as the big scary antagonist. However, since there were already 2 successful Jurassic Park films featuring T-Rex and another one literally about to be released a year after, some changes had to be made to set this one apart. So, in response, Carnotaurus was brought up as a promising alternative. But there was a problem. The real-life species, Carnotaurus sastrae, was actually a lightweight speedster compared to other large theropods, and even smaller than the 5-ton iguanodon protagonists. The final product was an amped-up gestalt of the real-life Carnotaurus and Tyrannosaurus. So, the creatures we saw terrorizing the film and Animal Kingdom
Yeah, this was so obvious, by the way, that it's a scaled up T-Rex with Carnotaurs
Theme
features.
park attraction was a fictional species, a juggernaut of a meat-eating bull far larger than its real-life cousin, Carnotaurus robustus. And where did this fictional species hail from? The characters in the movie reference them typically as coming from the south, and the debatably canon theme park attraction, Countdown to Extinction, tells us exactly where. The Looney Land, the crazy place, where only the most insane humans, like some of our very own staff, and truly bizarre beasts would call home. The land
Yeah, Argentina, Patagonia. I think, yeah, Carnotaurs should be from Patagonia. So, before we begin, what are your thoughts about these two? Well, do you think they will survive? Personally, these two are speedsters. These two have like bites probably stronger than any T-Rex. They've got armor. They've got armor. And they are massive as hell. So I'm gonna think they are gonna absolutely dominate. Because it's the obvious choice. We're gonna see. I don't really. If it's not for some poison or venom, what can stop these two?
And where you can't go a week without some kind of crazy newspaper headline? Florida. Yes, indeed. The full name for this species given by the faux skeleton on display at Animal Kingdom is Carnotaurus robustus floridana. Now, is this necessarily canonical to the films, especially in light of Florida being predominantly underwater in our own Mesozoic? Debatable. But today, we'll think of it as having our saurian equivalent of Florida Man on steroids being turned loose on the island of St. Hubert. We're just gonna roll with it. All right, folks, let's bring these meat addicts into the analysis platform. Study them for a bit before we unleash them to the island.
Look at the height of these things. These are at least somewhere in between 6 and 10 meters tall, which is 20 to 33 feet.
At least 2 Carnotaurus became living nightmares for the mass herd of migrating herbivores, so in today's scenario, we will be using both of them. The sheer terror they could inflict was evident in how everything from well-armored ankylosaurs, herds of formidable ceratopsians, to the most jacked iguanodon in the film were utterly terrified of the duo. Comparing the two on screen with each other, it does become clear one of them is noticeably smaller, even if this fella is still quite enormous. Figuring exactly how big they're supposed to be is tricky. The problem with CGI creatures morphing in size from one shot to the other is also present in this film, like in Jurassic World, though thankfully not as extreme as in Rebirth. There was some tie-in merch and DVD extras listing a potential size for the species. The pose is a bit difficult to use because it's not a flat horizontal shot of the whole body, like what is used in most size charts. And this size chart doesn't specify which Carno from the movie we are looking at. So
Probably the smaller one.
we had to bust out the measuring tapes for this one, and it's still a bit confusing. There's a lot of information, theories, and opinions circling the web about who was who in the finale. So, this Carno in the beginning of the film is said to be the one at the end, or it could be a completely different one. That is because in other deleted scenes, there were actually 3 Carnos, and the book implying that there could have been other Carnos apart from the 2 that were in this cave. It's a whole mess. So stick with us, because getting a good reliable size for these theropods is important in determining how they're going to fare in St. Hubert.
I think somewhere in between 15 and 30 metric tons, maybe some upper size estimates over 30 metric tons, so comparable to sauropods.
So widespread belief that the Carnotaurs seen in this scene and in the intro were the same ones. However, some of these shots are not lining up. Pachyrhinosaurus, according to the official merch, was stated to be 10 feet at the frill. Alidar, 15 at the top of the head. Here, the Carno towers over the Pachy at possibly around 25 feet. And that's not even accounting for the Carno being further away from the camera, meaning that it could have been a bit taller. This one at the end of the movie seems to be smaller, one who allegedly was the big one, making us initially believe that this fellow was the smaller of the 2 that survived the cave collapse in the movie. Other shots in the final act, however, do line up a little better with also being a bigger Carno. And since there is no real official confirmation in any tie-in media, film, or novel that this guy was the big one, we're left with some ambiguity. So what we're going to do is use the Carnotaurus size seen in the beginning of the film and slap it with the label of Big Carno, despite this not being 100% confirmed, and we'll just name it Diablo. Then use these proportions to figure out the size of the smaller one, Rojo. Using analysis of an accurate 3D reconstruction and reference points from the movies, and using this shot, we get an approximate measurement of 5.5 meters tall at the hip, 6.3 at the top of the head, and nearly 15 meters long. Using volumetrics, this animal at this scale could be anywhere from 16 to a whopping 22 tons. This absolute behemoth is approaching sauropod levels of size. Working our way down to the smaller companion Rojo, using selected clips, we can
13, 14 metric tons, I guess, at the upper size estimate.
Get a measurement of 4.2 meters tall at the top of the hip and total length at around 11.2 meters. Weight-wise, we could be looking at an animal that weighs 9 to 10 tons, very similar to the estimated weights of some adult T-Rex specimens.
That was an overestimate from my behalf. Florida man on steroids, yeah. An understatement of the century.
After all, a skeleton presented at the attraction in the animal kingdom did use a big Tyrannosaurus rex for a large chunk of the body with scaled-up Carnotaurs parts to match. Smaller Carno, aka Rojo. Height 4.2 meters at the hip, 4.8 meters at the head, length 11.2 meters, mass 9 to 10 tons. Big Carno, aka Diablo. Height 5.5 meters, 6.3 at the head, 14.6 meters long, weighing at 20 plus tons. But it's not just the size of these bruisers that is impressive. While they are noticeably slower than the real-life Carnotaurus on account of sheer mass, they do still have those proportionally long legs and the robust tail seen in the real thing to put them to use. A 2011 study by
Look at the tail, by the way. If you got slapped with this thing, Jesus Christ.
proportionally long legs and the robust tail seen in the real thing to put them to use. A 2011 study by W. Scott Persons IV and Philip J. Curie showed that those thick tails and well-developed leg bones of the real-life Carno were well designed for both high-speed running and maintaining a great sense of balance. The giant movie versions showed off similar skills even with all the weight slowing them down, chasing down prey in a sprint, and navigating steep inclines when climbing without the use of any forelimbs. They may not be as swift as their smaller kin, but they could definitely book it when they need to. Now, if these two are going to make it anywhere past the first big theropod thrown at them, they need to be able to bite back. Can they? Why, yes, of course! It just so happens that these jaws appear to be a rough halfway point between the real-life Carnotaurus and Tyrannosaurus rex. So Carnotaurus and other abelisaurs had a very specific kind of jaw anatomy that was
Fast snapping jaws, I guess.
built to snap down quickly but also open very wide, while still having a good bite force of their own. T-Rex, meanwhile, had jaws to crunch and continue to apply pressure while getting a good grip. The Florida freaks are thus able to both crunch down hard enough to inflict nasty
Honestly, I've had 2 nightmares because of these two fuckers.
wounds, even on reasonably large targets with a single well-placed bite. They may not be
Jesus
able
Christ.
to inflict nasty wounds, even a good grip. The
I need to see this animation again.
Florida freaks are thus able to both crunch down hard enough to inflict nasty wounds, even on reasonably large targets with a single well-placed bite. They may not be able to snap as fast as the real-life Carno or crunch as hard as a T-Rex, but if there were a set of jaws that were a jack-of-all-trades, then it would be these. How much force? Let's just say enough to kill almost anything on St. Hubert. Using a formula devised by Dr. Sakamoto and co., we can determine these bruisers had a possible crunching force of 35,000 to 45,000 newtons for Rojo and 53 to 70,000 newtons for Diablo. And
Seems appropriate. It's not a full... Yeah, well, it looks very much like Nightmare Fuel, the head in general, and because of that, I kind of overestimated it to have over 100,000 newtons, but it makes sense because it's not a Tyrannosaurus skull and not purely built for strength.
these are conservative numbers. Really, they could maybe be higher. A big misconception about bites in regards to combat, especially amongst big theropods, is that whoever has the strongest bite always wins. While there is a lot of weight behind this statement, would you believe that a ridiculously overpowered bite force isn't always a good indicator of who wins a fight? Sometimes even a fraction of max bite force can kill a rival. A lot of it comes down to who can bite first and land hits on target, more so than who bites harder, as we're going to find out soon.
Yeah, the small Carno even looks kind of small.
Additional asset, more so
Looks kind of small
than
here.
who bites harder, as we're going to find out
It's like a 10-ton plus T-Rex here. So what was your nightmare? Yeah. I roughly remember one as I think... Well, both nightmares are very similar because one of these two fuckers just ate me. A hole. And then I woke up in my basement, in my house.
soon. For additional assets, and ones that might be very useful here, are the robust heads and huge horns. 2018 studies by Raphael Delcourt speculated that abelisaurs, like Carnotaurus, were well suited to withstanding hits beyond just biting. When competing against rivals of their own kind, they might have been using these noggins in flank bashing and head-to-head shoving contests. The species is also heavily armored, more so than most predators. The belly isn't as reinforced, but the thick feature scales embedded across the sides and back can help deflect bites and claws. These plates could also be underneath the skin where you can't see them, making these two a lot more armored than they might seem at first. A perk of having all these spikes means that the tail is now sharp and serrated, adding even more force and damage when it's swung like a club, with enough strength to knock a multi-ton iguanodon around with a head thrash or swipe. Now, it's understandable it took a cave-in pounding involving hundreds of tons of rock falling down to kill one, and a plummet off of a cliff from unstable ground to take out the other. These two were actually pretty tough. So we are just about ready to send these two to the shores of St. Hubert, once our newly hired Dino Wrangler and channel member gets a hold of his bearings and, alright, there's a new job opening, folks, and
This is literally what happened to me, like in this clip. Just getting eaten by one of these Carnotaurs. Lol, yeah, basement. Call it a dungeon. I'm living 100 feet underground.
here's how to enter. Coming up, the Carno duo enters St. Hubert. Right off the bat, as soon as they step foot on the shores of St. Hubert, the colossal Carnos might just find themselves up against the most dangerous carnivorous force on the island, something that might have felled almost any other newcomers migrating to the region. Spinosaurus, height 4 meters, length 12 meters, quantity 4, possibly more. The quartet of Spinos that patrol the ocean and the shores are certainly more aquatic than their prototypes seen on Sorna, but they are still amphibious and capable of getting on land. Whether the Spinos are as aggressive towards other predators as their predecessor was remains to be seen. They did get along just fine with the local Mosasaurus, and they don't seem to be going out of their way to bully the T-Rex, but they still might be very territorial about the sudden arrival of two other massive predators on their beach. If a lone Carnotaurus robustus decided to stand and fight if a confrontation got physical, the journey into the island might stop short at the shore. Even with size on their side, if this was Diablo in a 4v1, that might be too much even for the Juggernaut, especially if the Spinos managed to force the battle into much deeper water, enough for the Mosa to take part and finish the deal. Now,
Yeah, true. But still, Diablo would be a formidable opponent for a pack of 4 Spinos.
these guys could most certainly swim, but they were dinosaurs that excelled in forests and deserts, and would be out of their element in the water. But in this scenario, we have 2 of them present, and even the mighty sailbacks would have to think twice if they try to bully 2 big ones. Even Rojo, the smallest of the 2, would likely still be heavier than any of them, and Diablo would be punching well above the individual Spinos weight class. In this early game stage, the Carno needs to settle. The Spinos' food source is likely out in the water and shore rivers for fresh drinking water and shelter. Not quite the environment that Carnotaurus thrives in. A confrontation realistically wouldn't result in the annihilation of either squad. At most, a very injured Spino and the other 3 retreating, and the Carnos heading inland where they would normally thrive anyways. Their needs are very unalike, so any future confrontation would likely not happen, due to them partaking in 2 different predatory niches. The Carnotaurs continue inland where meat is more abundant. Moving for the spaces where the foliage has been beaten back by large herbivores, the duo runs into its very first and plentiful source of food, Titanosaurus, height 15.7 meters, 20.7 meters in length. Now, if the so-called genius expert a certain pharmaceutical company hired as a guide was correct, and these stupendous sauropods are merely 11 tons, all the pair need to do is run straight at them and bowl them over like a giant Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade bull. Okay, in more
Please stand by. Animations will be there because Carnotaurus would make it, or would make for many bloody situations.
seriousness, the sauropods we see on screen are much more akin to the colossal Argentinosaurus. A few shots make it where these things could look some kaiju in the eye, but going off the official listings of height and length, they would be more realistically around 130 tons. Now, assuming they aren't absolute jobbers like the long necks are 90% of the time in this franchise, this would be an obstacle for even these horrendous hornheads. A full-grown adult could easily bruise or break parts of their bodies with a neck or tail swipe, and trampling would flatten them like a bloody pancake. But
Yeah, and they don't look like 20 meters, as said. 11 I haven't seen Jurassic World, but if 11 metric tons was their statement for the size of these animals, well, in real life it's closer, of course, but compared to what's on screen, it's a crazy difference. It's a crazy difference. And yeah, as he said, comparable to Argentinosaurus, the tail of way over 10 meters in length, so you get the idea of this. It's like belt to ass.
Carnotaurus in the real world did have the equipment to dispatch big game, and the ferocious Floridians aren't lacking in that department either. And, most importantly, the duo aren't recklessly stupid. They would be aware how dangerous an adult sauropod can be and wouldn't just blindly attack. With how many Titanosaurs there are, and how few big predators there are to cut down their numbers, there is bound to be some juveniles, injured, or sick individuals to be priority targets. And considering an apparently miraculously time-traveling Brachiosaurus in their own movie was fearful of the species, they may not be unaccustomed to hunting sauropods, so they would know to go for the weaker members of the herd and attack after dark when they have the advantage of night vision.
Yeah, crazy thing that Brachiosaurus was there at the end of the Cretaceous. Or, well, could be somewhere in the Cretaceous because the animals are mixed. I think even, was a Stegosaurus there? Yeah, I think a Stegosaurus was in Disney's Dinosaur as well. But some Stegosaurs survived into the Cretaceous.
Repeated hit-and-run attacks at night, as well as the two of them working together, they might well be capable of felling this kind of big game better than most carnivores on the island. Only the healthier adults would be too much for them. In truth, the two's journey might just stop here. They would have little other reason to keep traveling unless hurt by one of the adult Titanosaurs, or just exploring to check out new territories. They might wind up carving a niche completely to themselves with very little competition given how massive the herds are. But just for the sake of it, let's say they did travel across more of the island or took an alternative route to get to the Titanosaur grounds, such as the forested highlands. The denser forests neighboring the highlands of the island wouldn't exactly be the ideal territory, and the Carnotaurs duo would probably go in just to pass through. The denser timbers would restrict their movements, and there doesn't seem to be much big game here that would be enticing to them. But there is the question of carnivores from above and from the shrubs. Velociraptor, height 1.
Up the fries in the back, bro. From Velociraptor's point of view.
0.6 meters, length 3.9 meters. Mutadog, 1.8 to 2.1 meters tall, 4.8 meters long. And the big pterosaur, Quetzalcoatlus, height 4.9 meters, 11.9 meter wingspan.
I don't think the beak of a Quetzalcoatlus can impale the upper side of a Carnotaurus head. Maybe the underside because it's not as protected, but not the upper.
Raptor pairs, Mutadon gangs, and Quetzalcoatlus soaring above might all be noticed, but they wouldn't be much of a threat. Unless any of them decided to have more gumption than common sense, attacking even just one Carnotaurus alone would likely be suicidal, even with the advantage of cover. These two have armored hides that would deflect most of the damage any claws or beaks could do. It would take weapons from a much higher weight class to do damage to them. By contrast, just a simple head bash, tail swipe, or snap from the Carnotaurus would be debilitating, if not outright lethal to any of these predators, no matter how much agility they have. If a serious fight broke out, they would take a hit eventually. Outside of mobbing the pair and trying to encourage them to leave, there's not much anything the local predators can do. Still, with the unfavorable terrain and lack of game, the horned horrors have no reason to stay there. Heading for the marshes and riverways, however, might just change both of those variables. The central river cutting through parts of the island would be much more agreeable terrain to travel through, and potentially appealing prey can be found. Big herbivores such as Parasaurolophus, Ankylosaurus, and perhaps some ceratopsians could be found here and hunted down with no issues by the Carno Bros working together. Right. So, statements have been circling around about these two being a pair of mates. So we did some digging and found that in the novelization, both Carnotaurs are referred to with male pronouns. Whether they were siblings or just hunting buddies, that's still unconfirmed. And if there was any doubt that the first Carno seen in the film wasn't male, the CGI production team referred to it also with male pronouns. Back to what we were saying, since these two are working as a team equipped with the best weapons available, even the best armored herbivores might find themselves outclassed by an exceptionally large pair of quick and nimble megatheropods. But not all meat is retrieved by killing another dinosaur. Sometimes all it takes is running into a carcass where all the hard work has already been done for you. In this scenario, Rojo picks up the scent of a carcass along the river. As he approaches, his booming footsteps catch the attention of their first real challenge. Ember, Tyrannosaurus Rex, 4.6 meters tall, 12.5 meters in length. Possibly one of the biggest and most powerful Tyrannosaurus seen yet in the franchise, this Goliath nicknamed Ember would be capable of standing up to the Carnotaurus on land with even terms better than the Spinosaurus.
I think he would even win against Rojo, maybe if he doesn't get like impaled by the horn or blinded by a tail swipe to the eye. But these are very similar. Obviously, Diablo would probably win in, not probably, he would win in like 90% of the fights. At least you could apply for this new job. You mean Jurassic World? Yeah. No, thank you. You see how much shit's happening there? Not even a guarantee to survive in this job.
Taurus could. Size-wise, Ember is either slightly larger or about the same size as Rojo, unless either of the two could ambush the other in their element.
But I also have to say, at the same time, it's a very intriguing aspect working at a real-life Jurassic World. But you need, like, people who can actually control these animals. And it seems like maybe you can, maybe you can't. The larger the animals get, the harder it gets.
Slightly larger or about the same size as Rojo. Unless either of the two could ambush the other in their element, the Carnotaurus being quicker on land but Ember being more adept in the water, this would be a pretty close contest. If Ember is just as aggressive as Rexy and pushes for a fight, they might soon find themselves in the fight of their life against a rival predator that could easily be just as lethal to them as the other way around. Both of their species are life against
This merchandise, by the way. I would buy this just for shits and giggles.
a rival predator that could easily be just as lethal to them as the other way around. Both of their species have survived some horrific abuse, and without plot armor warping physics, either of these two are on such equal footing it would turn into a slugfest. The commotion of splashing water and moving trees would be something hard to miss by any nearby dinosaur. And in the event that the slightly less heavy Rojo gets into trouble, Diablo enters the arena. That's right, folks, Big Carno has entered the chat, and things don't look good for Ember, who now has another 20 tons stacked against him. Ember is a Tyrannosaurus, and if a Tyrannosaurus is anything in this franchise, they are scrappy and will stand their ground if they have to, even against larger opponents. But outside of ideal circumstances, this just isn't a fight Ember could easily win if they went up against Diablo, and they flat out couldn't win if it was a 2v1. The best option would be a standoff, and then the Tyrannosaur retreating into the deeper waters while putting up as much as they can to discourage being attacked. If a fight did break out, Ember would absolutely go out swinging. But crazy Floridians are used to messing with big reptiles in swamps. Numbers and pounds win the day, and T-Rex is presented with a choice: live to hunt another day or die. Things seem favorable so far in St. Hubert for Rojo and Diablo. However, if the Carno tag team continued traveling across the island, it would be perhaps inevitable that they would stumble across the ruins of the humans that warped this island beyond recognition, and the colossal carnivore that drove them out. Given that the Carnotaurs have never encountered anything like human structures before, the sight and smell of them might be uncanny enough to keep them away out of sheer confusion. But if they did inevitably wander into the open ground of the old laboratories and worker villages, it would also be inevitable that they would run into the apex of the island. Distortus Rex, height 8.1 meters, length 14.5 meters. Considering the high level of aggression and potentially violent curiosity Distortus has upon seeing anything unusual, a confrontation would certainly break out. Only, unlike any other matchup against any other big carnivore in the franchise, this would be a clash where the Distortus would find itself up against another meat eater virtually in the same weight class and then some. A collision course of titans might shake the island if Diablo and Distortus charged into one another and came to blows. The ferocious Floridian definitely has the speed and agility advantage, with a potentially more armored hide and a bite more adept at slicing. The deformed king has a keen advantage in dexterity and grappling ability, with a bite more oriented at crushing. The shredding chomp of the Carno would be ideal at causing large lacerations on the big but relatively lightly armored Distortus, whereas the crushing bite of the Distortus would be able to cause damage even through that thick armor of its opponent. A full body charge by Diablo might be enough to topple even the Distortus, at the risk of getting grappled. Meanwhile, the Distortus might have the strength to capitalize off that grapple, but wrestling an opponent of equal weight might unbalance the misshapen Goliath. This fight could potentially go either way, and might also be a face-off worthy of a video as well. But having Rojo there to tilt the odds, the chances swing back into Diablo's favor. With a smaller tag team partner, Diablo can land large body blows or take time to aim more critical bites, whereas Rojo can distract and damage the Distortus if it manages to topple or grapple its bigger ally by going for the legs or flanks. If the fight came to blows, it would be a ferocious altercation, and the Carnotaurs might lose a member, bringing down the beastly behemoth if they're not careful. But if any predators could pull it off, they could. More likely than not, however, even the Distortus might decide this fight is not worth it and avoid escalating the battle past the initial skirmish. With the power and teamwork to go the distance even against rivals like these, the gruesome twosome from the Sunshine State have what it takes to survive this monstrous island. And if they play their cards right, the nightmares of a bygone era might find themselves the new lords of a modern domain. And if you want to see some of this crazy Florida dino up close and personal, be sure to check out Animal Kingdom's Countdown to Extinction ride as soon as you can. Theme park renovations will be happening soon, and this attraction with its iconic museum, statues, and ride is going to be replaced. It seems like the Countdown to Extinction is finally going to be hitting zero soon. And while you're waiting in line to be terrorized by Dinosaur Florida Man, be sure to subscribe and check out more on the channel, because we haven't seen the last of these cantankerous carnivores here yet. They might have survived St. Hubert, but other challenges from other possibly even more nightmarish islands still await.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna get this shirt, you know. That's some real metal. That's really nice. Let's see, so I don't forget it. Where is Goji Center's merch here? Okay. I think I'm gonna buy it later. It looks so cool, bro. there's even the partially preserved fossil here, or that part that is a skeleton or a fossil on the right side. But yeah, they were always going to win. They've got aura, they've got teamwork, they've got size, quality, and yeah, not just quality, qualities like strength, speed, intelligence. So this was always going to happen. So let's see. I actually have the Krasny trilogy, like the Trial of the Sky Skull, and what was the third one? Like the Corporation Medley, Mesozoic, the Overseer, and the Vividin are doing. I actually want to wait for all of them to be released to watch them together, so that's not gonna be on today's stream. So I think I'm gonna do when the we could do some croc content together next week. Could you get me one? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it is a good video. I think I'm gonna watch that Armadillo Sucus video in private and then watch this one now, because of course people are also here for awesome bro content, and if it's not for crocodilian standards, awesome bro content is obviously like Deinosuchus and Purosaurus, which this video is definitely gonna cover.
Nature is beyond amazing and all around us. We got deserts, forests, rivers, mountains, oceans. The list is near endless. And while every habitat is breathtaking in its own way, there are those particular places that seem time and time again to captivate people more than normal. And there's perhaps no better example of this than the Amazon rainforest and river, sometimes collectively known as the Amazon Basin. This area is made up of extensive lush rainforests, swamps, and thousands of waterways, providing an abundance of resources, which allows for the existence of some of Earth's most unbelievable life. And its crazy nature has led to it often being touted as the last frontier on land. And this is further reflected by the fact that a poll with over 600 million votes listed it as one of the 7 new wonders of Earth. Impressive, and proof that nearly everyone knows about it. But that said, not all, or dare I say most, realize just how giant it truly is. The rainforest, for starters, is by far the largest on the planet, outcompeting the second place, Congo, by a magnitude of 3, while the Amazon River is so expansive and powerful that it moves water about 6 times faster than what's seen in any other river on Earth. In fact, you could combine the Nile, Mississippi, Congo, Ganges, Thames, and Yangtze River and still not beat the amount of water the Amazon is moving. And due to its sheer size, the Amazon in some ways seems eternal, and it's hard to imagine it ever being different. But yet, at one time, it was unrecognizable compared to now, and not just in how the actual landscape looked, but also in the sense of what called it home.
Yeah, that one time is actually not so long ago, 5-point-some million years. This land was still home to giant crocodilians like Purosaurus. Then there was, what was it called? That filter feeding came in, Murasuchus. And I don't know if Griposuchus or Gryposuchus was also still around. So some crocs, mega crocs actually, way bigger than any croc today.
If you think the Amazon is scary today, then boy oh boy, do I have news for you. Because once upon a time, it made its present day self look somewhat like a petting zoo. And there is no scarier time in the Amazon's history when it was not a rainforest, but rather a super mega lake, now known as Lake Pebas. This bonkers realm is believed to have started forming long ago, about 21 million years, give or take, during the Aquatanian. This was the oldest age of the Miocene epoch, and was generally defined as a dry and cool period. But clearly the Amazon didn't get the memo, as it remained relatively warm and wet by most people's standards. The climate had a lot to say in how things operate in these parts. Yet, what was having a far larger impact on the area was the wax and waning of the lands, with tectonic activity causing the Andean mountains to rise up. And their increased elevation eventually got to a point where the flow of water was heavily impacted, essentially creating a huge bowl in the west, in which water would get trapped. and thus the region.
Yeah. And giant terabots, that is correct. I think Phoros Rakos, for example, might have been a bit older, but some other terabots were still there.
Of water was heavily impacted, essentially creating a huge bowl in the west, in which water would get trapped. And thus the region rapidly began to flood and fill up to the brim with water, giving us the Pebos systems. Now, I did say this area was a super lake, yet the nuanced answer is that we aren't too sure as to what exactly this region really looked like. We know it was wet, surely. However, the question is, was it one massive lake, multiple lake systems, or a giant marsh, or something in between? And that's where it gets hazy, with one of the more accepted hypotheses being that it was a mega wetland, with loads of varying environments. Whatever the case though, you would have found a lot of water here, as the Lake Pebos system at its peak was larger than present-day Japan, and in certain areas could achieve depths of 50 meters or 150 feet. So for people with thalassophobia, this is rather unwelcome news, and this certainly wasn't helped by the fact that what lived in these waters consisted of what I would tentatively dub non-human friendly life, and honestly gave the Western Interior Seaway, i.e. the Earth's deadliest sea, a run for its money. Because if I had to choose across either one, I'm not exactly sure which one I would choose, which is saying something. Additionally, like the Western Interior Seaway, the Pebos mega wetland had phases to it, some of which were more chill and others more nope. And there is a clear time when it reached the peak nopeness, which was the Middle Miocene. This was a very important part in Earth's natural history as a whole. Yet, it was really an event in the midst of this age that mattered the most, the MMCO, or the Middle Miocene Climactic Optimum, an interval wherein temperatures worldwide rose, with the average temp being about 3 to 4 degrees Celsius warmer than the present, which for perspective would be kind of like going from Portugal to Syria. And based on present measurements, Lake Pebos would have been comparable to the top 5 current hottest countries, so you definitely want to bring some refreshment and a lot of sunscreen. This heatwave is believed to have stemmed from an elevation in atmospheric carbon dioxide, and might have also fed the vegetation of Pebos, resulting in giant trees, oversized marshes, thick mangroves, the lot, while also leading to the largest size for Lake Pebos in terms of maximum reach and water levels. And unsurprisingly, this allowed for an abundance of life to seep in, and cold-blooded animals in particular took a heavy liking to the new heat, which helped not only their diversity levels, but also their sizes. And though the Cenozoic as a whole is often called the Age of Mammals, Lake Pebos was definitely a place ruled by reptiles. Yet, despite each group of scalies reaping the rewards, so to speak, it was one group in particular that took over. Good old
Crocs. Yeah. So it's called the Pebos Mega Wetland. Interesting. And he says as well that it could give the Western Interior Seaway a run for its money.
Crocs. And if you thought Australia, the Everglades, or the Nile has a croc problem, think again, as the Pebos put them to absolute shame, with formations linked to the wetland, indicating a higher diversity seen in crocodilians than even birds. In other words, imagine a place where seeing a bird is more of a rarity than seeing a croc, which I don't know about you guys, but to me, it's probably not the kind of location I'd want to visit. And due to the high number of crocodilians living in Pebos, we see that there were many types, with niche partitioning being routinely observed.
I think one of these 3 was called Kutana Cayman or something like that. At least the image or paleo art is called like that on DeviantArt.
Along with heavy diversity and niche partitioning, of course comes great differences of size. And while a few remained within what we would consider the normal limits, a handful evolved into supersized giants. And this included the king of the mega wetland, and what was the largest caiman and possibly the biggest crocodilian to ever live, the Purosaurus. There are no words that capture just how monstrous this behemoth was, but I will try. The first reports of its existence comes from 1892, when skull material was located in the Puros region by a team of paleontologists, and the sizes of these skull pieces were nigh unbelievable, and they instantly knew this was something different, so to speak. And subsequent discoveries of more material only confirmed this, as what it unveiled.
And giant turtles, you say? Wasn't Stupendamus also from this region somewhere? Or in that time period? Like a giant, like potentially multiple ton turtle, one of the biggest turtles to ever live, comparable or even bigger than Archelon from the Cretaceous.
Was a supercroc that was built like a tank and had proportions off the charts, with the skulls alone measuring 4.7 feet or about 1.5 meters, and being almost comically robust at that, taking on a rather box-like shape. And so clearly from this powerful head alone, the Purosaurus was top dog in Pebos, and a vicious predator at that. Although its postcranial size, the body size, is something that not everyone agrees on, as postcranial bones have been rather elusive. But most studies have found that at the very least, they would have measured 9.2 meters or 30 feet long, and weighed over 6 tons, which already greatly exceeds the largest reptiles of today, and puts it on par with literal killer whales. But I have to warn you, things only get crazier after this, as these are the more quote-unquote conservative estimates. Other studies have reported theoretical maximums from 33 to 42, or even 52 feet. or 12.5, 10, and 15.8 meters, respectively. Additionally, at these bigger sizes, the weight also balloons, and it's possible that the largest adults weighed between 8.4 and 12.6 tons, which at the latter weight, we are talking about a crocodilian heavier than even a minke whale. If true, it would also make the Purosaurus the heaviest crocodilian ever, and though the accuracy of these estimates are kind of hard to assess, separate studies do suggest a high likelihood that the Purosaurus was indeed heavier than the most famous megacrocs, like the Deinosuchus or Sarcosuchus. And given its titanic broad jaws, it would have required a massive neck to support it, not to mention a muscular robust body as well. And given the absurd nature of its jaws, you know this guy had one mean bite, with models implying a bite force of up to 69,000 newtons, which sounds a lot, and it is, with very few animals having achieved anything even close to this. Not even the infamous T-Rex. And at this bite force, it'd essentially be like having a cargo truck dropped on top of you. But instead of tires crushing you, the damage was delivered by dozens of 2-inch or 5-centimeter long teeth that were curved, covered in 2 cutting edges, and thickly conical, allowing for tremendous bites straight onto bone without harming these teeth at all. And due to the
Yeah, imagine a croc. If this thing was around today, it would hunt elephants. It would. If there were elephants in its ecosystem, that is. But it hunted similar-sized mammals. So it would probably hunt elephants if it were to coexist with them. Yeah, there will be some. There must be.
their shape and design of the skull, it's clear that Purosaurus was a hunter of large vertebrates, who utilized puncturing and holding bites to debilitate and capture prey. And these stats alone make Purosaurus one deadly killer. But things only get worse for the rest of Pabos, as paleontologists reckon that despite its massive weight, this guy retained the classical finishing move seen in many crocodilians. In other words, the death roll. This brutal move is designed to not only subdue, but literally dismember prey, and with modern crocodiles, has been known to rip animals as large as buffaloes to pieces. So I don't want to imagine just how messy a death roll from the Purosaurus would have been. And thus naturally, this reptile was clearly the apex predator, and nothing else we know from the region would be safe from a fully grown one. Which is why it's also so unfair that Purosaurus had impeccable defenses as well, being covered in thick scales and osteoderms far greater than the armor seen in any of its descendants, and keeping it well protected from any animals or from its environment, as the waters of Pabos likely were riddled with fallen trees and various debris that could be pointy. And ultimately, the Purosaurus found extreme success with this build, as fossil remains show that it was not concentrated to specific environments within Pabos, but instead lived throughout the entire thing, inhabiting rivers, floodplains, and lake environments. And so, if you saw water run, and you were in said water, well, it was nice knowing you. But while Purosaurus was to the Pabos Formation what the T-Rex was to Hell Creek, it was by no means the sole crocodilian, nor was it even the only giant one. And a testament to this is that the Pabos was also home to possibly the largest Divialid ever. This family is currently
Probably talking. Gonna guess.
only represented by the Gharials and false Gharials, but in ancient Pabos, there was a whole lot more, including Gripposuchus. Now, I'd much rather swim into this guy than a Purosaurus, but to be honest, I'd prefer neither, as this guy was still a giant within its own right. Thus far, 4 species of this genus has been discovered, and the largest by a good margin is the Gripposuchus croizati, a species described in 2009 who seems to have been stuck in the northern tip of Pabos, possibly frequenting both freshwater and coastal environments, giving it access to a diverse range of food, which clearly did wonders for its size, as estimates over 10 meters, or 33 feet long, are very common for matured individuals. Only the Rampasuchus of the same family rivals it in title for the largest gaviolid. In seeing this, it's pretty evident that Gripposuchus didn't have many foes either, rather, just a lot of victims. Though I will say, none were probably as large as the prey Purosaurus was going for, since, opposite to the Purosaurus' broad skull, Gripposuchus had evolved an extremely narrow and slender one, leading to a theorized diet.
Yeah. Purosaurus may have even, just like in the picture, hunted some. Well, it's actually not hunted some, but it's actually proven that he hunted pteropods. There are some pterobird bite marks from Purosaurus. Or, no, Purosaurus bite marks on pterobirds, this way around.
Heavy and large fish. But given its sheer size, it's quite realistic that the occasional mammal might have been on the menu too. And if this duo of titans didn't seem like enough, there was also a third, stupidly huge croc that completed the Pabos trifecta, and its name, the Morosuchus. Like Purosaurus, it too was a type of caiman, yet these
For Morosuchus, it's actually been speculated. I think that it could be omnivorous or even herbivorous, so we don't really know. But it also could be a giant filter feeder,
couldn't have
or a type of a Venus flytrap type feeding because of its wide mouth. Almost looks like a, yeah, you would say like the equivalent of a fish and net type predator. I'm gonna say.
Been more opposite, with this genus in some ways being closer to ducks, as it sported a broad, flat and elongated skull that is often described as being duck-like. Sounds funny, but I'd probably never say that to its face, considering that adults in this genus could reach 9.5 meters or 31 feet long, and weigh in excess of 4 tons. So basically 4 giraffes mashed together. And because of the stature plus its odd face, there has been great interest in this mysterious creature's diet, with 3 main hypotheses having been proposed. The first is that it was a generalist eater that patiently waited for animals to drift into its waiting mouth, where it would then swallow them whole. The second option was that in a twist, this croc was really a gentle giant who fed on floating plant material. Though to be honest, most are not putting their bets on this idea, with majority support instead going to the last hypothesis, which is that it used its large duck-like mouth to sift through the muddy floors of rivers and lakes, in order to uproot and consume a mix of invertebrates, mollusks, crustaceans, and fish. And while it may not be as voracious as its other 2 massive relatives, swimming into one would still not have been good for your heart. This, I guarantee. And just remember, while these 3 were the true giants of Paybos's water, there were still plenty of other crocodilians to go around, with fossil formations revealing the presence of at least a dozen other genera that again demonstrated a wide range in size. And you would have found multiple kinds.
So let's see the graphic. Paleosuchus, not named, that's why it's probably called Spur. Gnatosuchus, Kutana caiman. Actually, a member of a still living genus, caiman. Caiman 1 Langstoni, Murasuchus, Gryposuchus, and Purosaurus. Yeah. Pretty rough crocodilian environment, or crocodilian heavy environment. Behold the reptilian duck. Yeah, actually probably a Natosuchus, but Murasuchus is also a good shout for that. Because an Anatosuchus is literally called duck croc.
Wide range in size, and you would have found multiple kinds that rival the largest crocodilians of today, whilst there was also a handful of much smaller genera that were in some cases dog-sized or even smaller. And that might sound
This one video was from a crocodile koa video.
good, but what this really means is that every animal in Paybos had a croc designed to hunt them. But as Ian Malcolm so beautifully put it, life, finds a way. And coexisting creatures put up a good fight against these tyrants, using some of that good old gigantism right back at them, which is why this area also became home to a lot of large fish, including Potamotrigon that rivaled the heaviest freshwater stingrays on record, and multiple croakers and drums that were human-sized. Yet, the animal that would likely turn the most heads in these waters, which wasn't a croc, was actually a turtle. Though I frankly think calling it a kaiju makes a bit more sense, because it was the biggest freshwater turtle of all time, and one of the biggest, period, the Stupendimus. And don't let this name confuse you, as it has nothing to do with being stupid, besides perhaps your expression when seeing one, but 100% to do with it being stupendous.
He just made it blush. Yeah, those snapping jaws, you don't want to mess with them. But at the same time, Stupendamus, every Stupendamus, or every adult Stupendamus is gangster until Purosaurus shows up.
Which is what sums up this reptile, who even gave the likes of the Archelon a run for its money, as its carapace alone was in some cases 2.86 meters or 9.4 feet. And
I think there is an even bigger specimen of another turtle.
remember, this was the shell, not the entire body. So it comes as no surprise that it was also quite hefty, being over 1 ton. And it's possible that these extreme proportions were essentially forced upon the turtles by the threat the crocs posed, and the enormous shell would have certainly come in handy when traversing these waters. And we even have direct evidence of this, as multiple specimens from Paybos have been found with bite marks in their carapace, as well as actual embedded teeth that were crocodilian in nature. Now, I expect that not every turtle was this fortunate, but at least in these cases, it seems like the XXL shells did the trick, helping their would-be victims survive and fight another day. Now, I don't know about you guys, but seeing a mega-sized turtle would certainly check a few time-traveling boxes for me. But this is one flippered animal you definitely would want to observe, only from a safe distance away.
That head, that type of snapping jaw from Stupendamus reminds me of some ceratopsians. If you get your legs in there, or any body part really, you're cooked.
From a safe distance away, is while we generally think of turtles as being harmless, cute creatures, for the most part, the Stupendamus was a feisty guy. It possessed a hunkering beak that was curved and hard, allowing it to snip and crunch various items, likely resulting in a durophagous omnivorous diet that was rather generalistic in nature. And given its size, fish, mollusks, smaller crocodilians, and snakes were all likely game. And the defiance to their crocodilian rulers among the turtles did not end at Stupendamus either, as another large-bodied genus lived alongside it, the Caninimus. It was a smaller genus than Stupendamus, that was somewhat similar in size to leatherback sea turtles.
This is that one nightmare turtle, I guess, from its design and anatomy looking like the spikes on the back, or spike-like osteoderms.
So, not massive, but still definitely.
Okay, yeah, I've just. My headphones just disconnected. Sorry, guys. I have to probably restart them.
That was somewhat similar in size to leatherback sea turtles. So, not massive, but still definitely not pet-sized. And it would have been even less optimal for house living considering its bad temper, since Carnotaurs was highly aggressive and carnivorous. This notion stems from its hooked jaw that was stout, robust, and had curves along it similar to what's seen in the alligator snapping turtle. And thus the belief is that this was just one big old snapping turtle. Albeit, opposed to the risk of losing a hand, you'd be at risk of losing your entire legs, arms, and maybe even head from a bite. And it likely fed on anything it found, except for perhaps giant crocodilians. But who knows, perhaps it tried. And so, when even the turtles are unhinged, you know a place is messed up. But don't forget, you also have the usual nightmare suspects. In other words, sharks. Now granted, these cartilaginous fish seem to have been extremely rare in the Pebos overall, and limited to the regions closer to the coasts, that were likely brackish and exposed to periodic marine incursions, which are known to certainly have happened. And so this was just one more thing to worry about. And this is why it's seriously impressive that aquatic mammals managed to show up here in any amount, despite their relatively cold-blooded onslaught, with the two main mammalian groups in the Pebos waters being Sirenians and river dolphins. At least multiple species of each coexisted with the reptiles and fish, and like those groups, also ranged in size. For the Sirenians, they could be quote-unquote fun-sized, all the
Yeah, look like manatees. Cute animals, by the way.
way to the sizes seen in the extant manatees, while the dolphins, on the other hand, tended to swing larger, and actually got in on that good old gigantism from time to time, as it was here that the biggest river dolphin of all time lived, the Pebanista. Today, that title for the largest river dolphin goes to the Amazonian river dolphin, that coincidentally lived in a corresponding area, and whose adults measure up to 8.5 feet and weigh about the same size as a gorilla, which is respectable. Yet, it has to beef up a bit more if it wants to catch up to the Pebanista, who is about 30 to 35% larger on average. And similar to the other inhabitants in the Pebos, the Pebanista also became a bit more menacing than its living relatives. And we know this thanks to the unique construction of its skull, which compared to extant river dolphins was unusually sturdy, and sported relatively longer and thicker teeth. What's more is that its snout was oddly elongated, yet wouldn't have been flimsy or fragile, instead being sturdy and capable of enduring high stresses due to the robustness of its overall skull. And then on top of that, the postcranial skeleton featured many attachment points for muscles. So in other words, we had a dolphin Chad on our hands. And paleontologists do agree that the Pebanista practiced a raptorial lifestyle that was supported by the cetacean's hallmark OP ability, echolocation, which would have proved wonders for Pebanista, as the development, or rather reduction in their eyes, reflected that the Pebos was mainly composed of highly muddied waters, where visibility was very low, and thus things like echolocation would have been phenomenally useful. And it is this fact that really gives me the heebie-jeebies, that fact being that the Pebos is essentially a giant murky swamp. Imagine that for a second. You could be just minding your own business, paddling out on a little canoe, and peer over the side and see absolutely nada, just a dark abyss, while unbeknownst to you, multiple predators over 1 ton could be lurking just an arm's reach beneath you. Yeah, no thank you. Here's the problem though. Staying away from the water is not a foolproof plan to survive in the prehistoric Amazon, as the land was also home to its own nightmares.
Jesus Christ, that was a jump scare. What was that? Walking with beasts? Must have been Basilosuchus?
Staying away from the water is not a foolproof
Not
plan
Suchosaurus.
to survive in the prehistoric Amazon, as the land was also home to its own nightmares
Or a shark.
as well. From formation sediment, it seems like the majority of vegetation and habitats in the system, plus its immediate surroundings, was a mix of rainforests, palm swamps, normal swamps, ferns, and open flooded areas where aquatic plants are abundant.
Three-horned place. Hi. Hi as well. Hello. How are you doing?
And this might sound lush and picturesque, but don't be fooled. All this vegetation did was make it easier for terrestrial scaries to hide. And in Pebos, there were 2 families in particular that were essential to keep an eye out for: the Sebacids and forest rackets. Both
True. The Sebacids were also here. Or should I call them Sebacosuchians? The biggest land crocs well, since the Triassic, I guess, since the early Suchians, and some crocodilomorphs from the Jurassic, like Raisin and Drogoby. Barynosuchus is like a multiple ton animal, and Dentaneosuchus from Europe, which is also a big animal, but not relevant for this video. But Barynosuchus is probably relevant for this video. And the Phorusrhacus, the terror birds, yeah. If you're traveling there, guys, put the fries in the bag.
Both of these groups are like the biggest terrors in the water, i.e. reptiles, kind of. So again, so much for the age of mammals. But I guarantee you that you would not be mixing these two up. For the sabekids were a group of typically large, ferocious croc-like crocodilomorphs who hunted utilizing powerful skulls, jaws, and teeth, which were actually more similar to those of giant meat-eating theropods than to other crocodilians. Oh, and they also had long limbs, allowing them to run. Yeah, run. And unlike what we've been programmed to believe about crocodilomorphs, these guys were completely terrestrial. So in other words, they probably ran fast at that. And then you had the Phorusrhacids, or the terror birds. So technically reptiles, in a sense, who were, as the nickname suggests, predatory birds, albeit flightless.
I'm not sure if Phorusrhacus is still known from that time period, but Devinchentia, maybe? Another should be another South American Phorusrhacid. Yeah, there was a shark? Okay, so yeah. Makes sense.
Ones, but were a bit too oversized to be confused for a chicken, and like the same type of teeth as seen in sabekids, but still were able to kill plenty thanks to their exceedingly durable, sharp curved beaks, as well as their long legs that granted them immense speeds while chasing down prey. So imagine Roadrunner, but multiplies deadliness by 100. Now both the terror birds and sabekids were not new news in prehistoric South America, as well before the Paybos system they were around. Yet, the wetlands really brought out the worst in them, because it was in the Paybos that the largest of each of these families lurked. For the sabekids, this was the infamous Barynosuchus, an animal who needs little introduction, and the adult could reach 7.5 meters or 25 feet long. In other words, greater than the length seen in the longest modern crocodilians. And just to remind you again, these guys are running, not swimming, which is only more impressive when you consider that they also weighed about 2 tons, thanks to their build.
Well, if you're traveling back there, you can build a tree house basically and go cry in the corner. Because what are you gonna do? You need you need multiple people with firearms. Otherwise, you're not on land. In the water, you're fucked. You're just. You'd need a battleship type submarine or something. I don't know. Because and even then, it's still murky waters. What are you gonna do? How are you gonna conquer this ecosystem as a human? Very hard to. Probably impossible without help from tools or other people.
Than armor. And to make matters worse, there are even more extreme estimates, which suggest that 10 meters, or 33 feet, was also within the realm of possibility, which would be like stacking 3 rhinos standing back to back. Now I will say, subsequent studies have typically stated lower estimates, but in either case, the Barynosuchus remains the largest known sabekid, as well as a very strong contender for the biggest land predator to have ever lived since the freaking dinosaurs. Talk about an achievement. And so given this, the Barynosuchus did obviously blow away the
since the freaking non-avian dinosaurs.
Competing terror birds in the wetlands. Yet, the birds did muster a respectable fight, as recovered bones from the region showed what is among the largest terror bird ever. A for now unidentified species that would have stood at 2.5 meters or over 8 feet, making it not only taller than the likes of Shaq, but also one of the tallest birds of all time. And
wasn't Brontonis because you're talking about it, a thunderbird? Or what were they called? Dromonophids? Like very big, herbivorous, flightless birds, who were, of course, because the herbivores, especially in mating season, are very territorial, of course, also very dangerous, even though they're herbivores.
Given its vertical exceptionality, this bird would have been a hefty fellow too, weighing around the same as a lion. And for me, this would make me want to skip seeing this guy on a time trip vacation. But for others in Paybos, their size just made them more appetizing.
So, what was this genus now?
The competing terror birds in the wetlands. Yet, the birds did muster a respectable fight, as recovered bones from the region showed what is among the largest terror bird ever. A for now unidentified species that would have stood.
Ah, yeah, it was unidentified. Must be the one species that had bite marks from Purosaurus on it.
2.5 meters or over 8 feet, making it not only taller than the likes of Shaq, but also one of the tallest birds of all time. And given its vertical exceptionality, this bird would have been a hefty fellow too, weighing around the same as a lion. And for me, this would make me want to skip seeing this guy on a time trip vacation. But for others in Paybos, their size just made them more appetizing, despite the fact that they were also terrestrial apex predators, as terrorbird bones have been found riddled in bite marks, indicating that it became someone's KFC. And the culprit? Our old pals, the megacrocs. So yeah, I think we're gonna have to take our chances on land. And yet, they still are not good odds. For beyond the larger subachids and terrorbirds, you also had the smaller, more diverse members too, such as the Langstonia and multiple unidentified terrorbirds, plus some unwelcomed faces that are still present in the Amazon.
There's some like mega snakes as well. Like the predatory snakes are, what is this group called? The group around Vasuki is the biggest member of this group. Oh my god. Like they were also around in the Cretaceous and survived the mass extinction. To survive the meteor. So, wow.
Namely a variety of boa constrictors. So with all this said,
Okay, no, it's boa constrictors. I've just thought about like the largest predatory snakes, this group. But yeah. Titanoboa, by the way, is also older than the Paybos system.
this area is without a doubt exceedingly unhinged, even for a prehistoric environment. I mean, think about it. In one spot, you could find the largest river dolphin, turtles, caiman, gavialid, and land predators since the dinosaurs, all in one spot. Most places would be considered crazy for just having one of these things, let alone all of them. And given this, it's seriously impressive that besides terrifying predators, herbivores existed too, and were unsurprisingly the most widespread animals in this part, represented by none other than us. Well, mammals. In the waters, our diversity wasn't exactly the most impressive, even making the extant mammals in the Amazon seem rather mundane and boring. For instance, today one of the otter creatures in the Amazon is the capybara, the biggest living rodent on Earth, which loves swimming, lives by the water, and is actually semi-aquatic. So pretty interesting. But back during the Middle Miocene, these guys had not yet come along. But in their place were other rodents, including in Paybos, the Phobaramus, a grass grazer who is a relative of modern-day guinea pigs. But that's where the similarity stops, as it could not be farther from them in size, being more similar in that department to polar bears, making it among the largest rodents of all time. Meanwhile, the Paybos system would have been home to an absurd amount of ground sloths too, a group of unfortunately now extinct sloths that were far more agile, active, and terrestrial than living ones, and who also tended to be more unusual in stature. In Paybos, their level of diversity was off the charts. We are aware of at least 10 different genera that call this place home, and would have
This is the main source of food for animals like Barynosuchus and Purosaurus.
offered the perfect mount lineup. For across the bunch, there were species akin in size to large dogs, pigs, deer, and even elephants, at least Asian elephants, as the ground sloth, Eurymachia, is believed to have weighed up to 4 tons. In addition, 1+ ton neo-ungulates would have been a common sight as well, plus animals that superficially resembled bisons and rhinos, but just lacked horns. Then moving on to some of the more funky-looking life, you also had a mix of glyptodonts, Litopterna, and of course, anteaters, who are actually deceitfully large, and hard to miss given their highly elongated tongues, strange eating manners, and highly modified skulls that honestly look like they're missing a part. And if you think you can't take any more new animals, then hold on to your horses, because I can't let you go without mentioning that primitive primates, bats, Astrapotheria, Metatherians, and Chiroptera were all out in this mega wetland, repping us mammals as well. So by now you should have gotten the memo that Lake Paybos was one heck of a place, and maybe a tad bit too much for nature to handle, as obviously many walks of life I just mentioned do not exist anymore, nor does obviously the mega wetland. So what exactly happened? How does such an expansive environment disappear? Well, just like the Andes giveth, so do they taketh. And during this whole time, they kept rising up and up and up, eventually reaching a point where instead of flooding the area like a bowl, the bowl started leaking water out, and the area slowly started to drain, causing immense shifts in the environments that forced animals to move out or disappear. At some point, this uplift of land even ended up blocking what is now known as the Amazon River from flowing into the Pacific, eventually resulting in its flow to do a complete shift. So yes, at one point this iconic river didn't even run the same way as it does now. And over enough time, the Paybos system fully emptied out, until the only remaining water became the Amazon and its tributaries, which have remained to this day. But of course, many of the amazing and terrifying animals that called the system home are no more, but perhaps for the best. Thanks for watching, and until next time, on
One heck of a terrifying ecosystem. Even more terrifying than more terrifying than Hell Creek. Maybe not. Well, it's on land. I don't know. Probably more terrifying than the Morrison. I don't really know. Maybe it is. Maybe not. But if you're talking about the fact that it's a lot of swampy areas and one big lake with murky waters, it is more terrifying than even the Morrison Formation. Probably the most terrifying ecosystem ever. Maybe up there with Cretaceous Africa. Definitely in top 5. Definitely in top 5. And what video we got next? Yeah, that actually suits the topic of Amazon. Titanoboa wasn't the largest snake. Well, not because it's about Titanoboa, but because it's about, I think Vasuki also is a South American snake, so that fits the topic.
Back in 2002, an expedition through various coal mines in the Cerrejón Formation of Colombia dug up hundreds upon hundreds of different thoracic vertebrae and ribs. And not only were many of them well preserved, each one was noted for being unusually large. However, the scientists that found them weren't exactly shocked or impressed, as the formation they were found in was well known for housing numerous reptilian giants, primarily kaiju-like turtles and monstrous crocs in the Paleocene. And because of this, plus the fact that certain reptiles superficially have similar vertebrae, the team simply concluded that they had stumbled upon a new crocodilian. Pretty cool, but nothing to write home about. However, only a few years later, the fossils were transported to the Florida Museum of Natural History, where by chance, they were re-examined. And this re-examination led to a rather unexpected find, which was that this had been no giant croc, but rather a supersized snake. And when I
Best bet to stay in the trees and fish for food, and that it doesn't work. Yeah, I'll just take the corner if I was a human. Yeah, just to reiterate on the last video. Vasuki, yeah, because it's Indicus. True, it's because it's Vasuki Indicus. So we're going from South America to India now.
say supersized, I mean supersized, as it belonged to an apparently titanic serpent, and thus they aptly called this new snake the Titanoboa. And since its announcement to the world, the Titanoboa has become an icon in the world of paleontology, known by the masses and hailed as the largest, most powerful snake to have ever lived.
Probably a piscivorous animal, though. A fish-eating animal, mostly, because it is not deemed as predatory as the likes of Vasuki and the family. I would tell you the family, but I can't think of the name right now.
And this boa was definitely a big one, as adults might have measured up to 12.8 meters or 42 feet in length, maybe even 14.3 meters or 47 feet, which, just to put that in perspective, is akin to the length of a fully grown sperm whale. So yeah, no thank you. And with these estimates, the Titanoboa easily dethroned the previous record holder, the Gigantophis garstini, a type of Matsoidae from Eocene Egypt.
Yeah, Metzoids, that was it. The Metzoids are the biggest predatory snakes.
I'm sure if I was to take to the streets and was to ask people what the biggest or scariest snake ever was, I'm confident that most, if not all, would claim Titanoboa, if they like paleontology that is, and they would do so with confidence and their chest puffed out. But here's the thing, the Matsoidae, who had just been usurped, was a family of snakes who were just as messed up as the boas, and throughout history, they cooked up some really messed up serpents.
So what is this family
Who were
called?
just as messed up as the boas, and
Boidae. Yeah. Yeah, Mashikasaurus is getting cooked by a Metzoid.
throughout history, they cooked up some really messed up serpents besides just the Gigantophis. And recently, it was discovered this family created a species of their own, which was so monstrous that it may just have the Titanoboa beat. And yet, the public has barely ever heard of it. So without
Yeah, and it was claimed that it hunted early whales in its ecosystem, which is crazy as well.
further ado, let me introduce you to Vasuki indicus. This absolute unit of a serpent was only described just last year, in 2024. Yet, the holotype specimen has actually been unearthed since 2005, when in the Indian state of Gujarat, a collection of 27 pre-cloacal vertebrae were found, some of which were even arranged in their would-be life positions. Ironically though, a bit similar to the Titanoboa's case, the paleontologists who stumbled upon these bones believed they had found a new croc, not a snake, and thus the fossils didn't undergo any further review. Yet, unlike the Titanoboa, who was re-examined a few years later, this specimen had to be patient, as it wasn't until 19 years down the road that someone decided to take a second peek at the matter. And boy oh boy, were they in for a surprise, as with better technology and more attention, they realized, just like the Titanoboa, that this was no crocky, but rather part of a giant snake. And due to certain characteristics seen in the vertebrae, it was no doubt a type of Matsoidae, albeit a type never seen before, as it was far bigger than any known species, including the Gigantophis. Based on its post-zygapophyseal width, the team reckoned that at the very least, this new serpent must have been between 10.9 to 12.2 meters, or 36 to 40 feet, already putting it in the top 5 largest snakes of all time, and longer than any reptile today. 36 to 40 feet, already putting it in the top 5 largest snakes of all time, and
Paleophis is also there. Okay,
largest snakes of all
there it is. Titanoboa, Vasuki, Paleophis, Gigantophis. So Gigantophis is now fourth place.
time, and longer than any reptile today. However, based on its pre-zygapophyseal width, it was even larger than this, with that bone yielding a length of 15.2 meters or 50 feet, giving it a strong edge over its largest relative, and even a slight edge over Titanoboa. And at this length, the Vasuki doesn't just become the new king of snakes, but also the longest non-dinosaur animal to have ever lived on land. And what do you call such an imposing beast? Well, if you've been paying attention, I've said it a few times, which is the Vasuki indicus. And this might not seem to mean anything at first, but it really is a very fitting name, as Vasuki refers to the king of serpents in Hinduism, while indicus references the fact that it was discovered in India. And so naturally, the discovery of a snake possibly bigger than Titanoboa created quite a bit of buzz. But
Its name then means Indian serpent king or serpent god.
there was, and still, is one looming question, which is that, while we have fair evidence that it was longer, we don't know for sure if Vasuki was heavier or lighter than the Titanoboa, given that the latter possessed a more robust, wider skeleton. And as of now, the maximum weight given to Vasuki indicus is about 1.1 tons, whereas the Titanoboa may have been slightly heavier, with its max estimates being about 1.25 tons. So, not a huge difference, but enough that you might start questioning if Vasuki really outscares the previous ruler. And to that I say, ye must have little faith, because I can almost guarantee that if you had to pick one of these guys to meet in person, the safer option would almost certainly be the Titanoboa.
Yeah, because this one is more predatory. Could you imagine a crocodile-snake hybrid easier to get a crocodile if I can just swallow anything that fits in its mouth? Or a snake with a powerful bite force? Huh? Could you... a crocodile-snake hybrid... I think the swallowing method, but I'm definitely not sure. I'm not a hybrid maker. I'm not aware of the symbiotic, I want to say, effects with these anatomical features, but I think the croc snake hybrid that can swallow anything would do better than the snake with a super powerful bite, because snakes literally survived the KT mass extinction event, or KPG mass extinction event, with their slow metabolism and not having to eat very often, and with especially for efficiency reasons, I guess the swallowing is probably better, and then also surviving hard times, the swallowing is probably also better, because you're a super generalist or opportunistic hunter.
And the reason for this is that you have all been lied to. Titanoboa was no Titan Slayer. See what I did there? Now settle down, everyone. Before you guys pick up your pitchforks, let me explain. When it was first described and classified as a boid, paleontologists assumed that Titanoboa would have acted a lot like a modern anaconda, which eats just about everything they can manage to swallow, or sometimes can't. With the main difference being that Titanoboa is like an anaconda on megaroids, and thus would have been able to tackle giant crocs, turtles, and pretty much anything else that shared its environment. And for the most part, this early hypothesis has shaped how mainstream media has portrayed the Titanoboa, in other words, as a monstrous killer. However, in recent years, after more cranial material was recovered, scientists started to notice that its skull was quite unlike that of most boids, having an unusual palate, an abnormal number of teeth, as well as the teeth themselves being suspiciously curved and shaped like hooks. Fishing hooks, to be exact. And therefore, the idea started to creep in that Titanoboa was all along just an oversized fisher, not a mammal killer, or reptile killer. And sure enough, what scientists also discovered was that these morphologies were not like those of its relatives, but rather like those of modern-day, say, amphibian snakes, specifically those who maintain a piscivorous diet. And if you need any more evidence, then take into consideration where the Titanoboa actually lived, which was warm regions where extensive rivers were found, along with a wide range of fish. And remains of the snake are often associated with various lungfish and osteoglossomorphs. So, in other words, it looks like the snake had a taste for sushi, not chicken, if you get my drift. Now, Vasuki indicus, on the other hand, probably would have been much more interested in you than your pet goldfish.
Yeah, but sushi is very nice, actually. It's KFC is nice, sushi is nice, both nice dishes. So yeah, exactly. It's a piscivorous slash fish specialized hunter.
With its vertebrae suggesting it to have most likely been a terrestrial snake that preferred to spend its time on the ground than in the waters, or the trees for that matter too, with it being too heavy for the latter. Though I will say that in the case of swimming, it is believed to have been quite capable, and was probably surprisingly good at it. So if giant crocs were enough to keep you out of the water, then the Vasuki will. This is besides the point though. The bigger thing here is that these vertebrae not only reflected primarily terrestrial locomotion, but that it was also a constrictor snake, who lacked any specific adaptations that would suggest a specialization in fish, and thus is presumed to have been more of a any kind of opportunity kind of guy, eating crocs, turtles, fish, other snakes, and get this, even primitive whales. So yeah, it definitely had quite the appetite. Here's the thing though, which actually to me makes the Vasuki even scarier. If you were sent back into its realm, you wouldn't find yourself running away or being chased by this creature, as its hunkering size rendered it quite slow and immobile. So instead, you would have had to be on edge for every second you were there. Because to get around the speed issue, the Vasuki Indicus evolved to be an expert ambush hunter that likely utilized camouflage to stage strikes on unsuspecting prey, which would then kill via constriction. Now I know what you're thinking. There ain't no way I'm missing a 1-ton snake. And yes, its size would make it a bit easier to spot, but don't forget, snakes are really good at hiding. Like, really, really good. I mean, there's even the hypothesis that humans evolved good eyesight because of them. So yeah, good luck. And let me tell you, if you're starting to think that messing with a Vasuki is a bad idea, then just wait to hear how it would eat you. Hint hint, it's not pretty. You may know this if you've seen one of my older videos, but the group it belonged to, the Matsoidae, were a fairly ancient family of snakes, which appeared about 28 million years before the Boids did.
What video was that?
Belonged to, the Matsoidae, were a fairly ancient family of snakes, which appeared about 28
Interesting.
million years before the Boids did, during the late Cretaceous. And because of this old age, they were quite primitive. And one way this showed was through the construction of their jaws, which unlike those of the Boids, lacked an extra quadrate bone and elastic tendons, that in Boids is what allows them to open their mouths to freakish angles. And so, without these adaptations, the Matsoidae, despite being constrictors, wouldn't have been able to swallow their prey whole. Sounds good at first, but honestly, you'd prefer it if they gulped you down. Because instead of swallowing, they simply resolved to use their varanoid-like teeth to tear off chunks of flesh that were bite-sized to then swallow. And getting fed on by one may have resembled what you see Komodo dragons do to deers or eels to their respective prey, which is, in other words, just straight up horrifying. Luckily for you though, if you did happen to get caught by a Vasuki, you probably wouldn't need to worry about feeling its teeth tear at your flesh, for its constrictions killed prey at lightning speed, thanks to ridiculous forces. Let's take the anaconda for a second, an obviously feared predator who is scary enough to have gotten its own movie franchise, and can squeeze with 90 pounds per square inch. Very impressive. Yet, the Vasuki Indicus makes it look like a complete chump, having vertebrae that are up to 6 times wider than those of the anaconda. In other words, its squeezing was a tad bit tighter, and its strongest contractions possibly generated forces akin to that of a crocodile bite.
Yeah, it's restricting a becket?
Squeezing was a tad bit tighter, and its strongest contractions possibly generated forces akin to that of a crocodile bite. Good luck surviving that. And besides the actual bone width, we do see that along the Vasuki skeleton, it possessed relatively high-sitting ribs, which helped form a stronger cylindrical trunk shape, as well as transversely wide vertebrae and broad humeral keel, which is a fancy way for saying that it had a lot of large attachment areas where powerful muscles would have gone. When you consider all of this together, you arrive at the harrowing conclusion that if this snake came back from the dead, many of us would be in trouble. This also doesn't even take into account that the Vasuki likely had great eyesight and a keen sense of smell, thanks to their forked tongues, which allowed them, and other snakes, to collect scent particles from the air, meaning that while animals had to be super vigilant just to spot it, it would know where you are no matter what. Suffice to say, this was one bad apple, and quite the package. Albeit, there is a drawback to its design, because it turns out that sustaining a giant serpent of its proportions takes a lot. It essentially requires a very specific kind of environment, and thus, the Vasuki Indicus was not a commonality during its existence, rather a rarity, with fossils only being known from India, and on top of that, just from one single location, the Naredi Formation of Gujarat. Now, during the Middle Eocene, India was much warmer than present, and also more isolated, still being an island that was drifting upwards. And as a result of these two factors, you got a lot of unique environments and strange evolution, which obviously led to the Vasuki, who specifically inhabited mosaic habitats such as back swamp marshes. Here, there was an abundance of other life, which in many cases was also large as well, which provided the Vasuki with the needed resources to attain its size. And thus far, it's known to have lived alongside numerous walks of life, including catfish, turtles, crocodilians, as well as the early whales Andrewsiphius and Cutchocetus, who were in fact so early on in the evolutionary tree that they were probably not even fully aquatic yet, and thus snakes hunting whales on land might have been a real possibility. Pretty trippy, huh? Along with the other known animals from this environment, paleontologists are also aware of a myriad of life that almost certainly encountered the Vasuki as well, given how close they were found near Naredi. And it seems like the entire region was chock full of primitive whales, namely Carnotaurs, Indocetus, Babiocetus, and Datacetus, as well as the primitive Sirenians, Protosiren, Eosiren, and Eothyroides, a couple of which, by the way, may have ventured onto land too, given the presence of limbs. So those poor sea cows, or land cows, or sea land cows, had to watch out as well. And there seems just to have been something in the area that really brought out the most in snakes, with Vasuki being by no means the sole serpent around, with a variety
Probably another Matsoid.
of pythons also being known of. And specifically, we think that the pythons which lived in this environment are actually the same ones that still live there today, a testament to just how effective and efficient snakes are. And if this area is starting to sound a little bit too snaky for you, then unfortunately, I've got some more bad news. Because like I said, India was essentially an island at the time, so if you wanted to leave it, you'd have had to venture out to sea in order to escape. But it turns out that escaping wasn't really an option either, as guess what? Snakes were there too, and giant ones at that, namely the Pteris venus, a marine serpent with a powerful tail fluke and a large body that was up to 5.7 meters or 19 feet long. So sure, not outclassing the Vasuki, but definitely big enough for me to immediately not like the thought of it.
Almost looks like a giant eel right there.
And that just drives home how crazy the Vasuki is. I mean, there's literally a giant snake swimming around in the waters, like Mario 64, and yet, it is not your biggest problem. And unfortunately for the life in India, the Vasuki would remain a major threat for a very long time. Because while it did need perfect conditions in order to arise, it stuck like gum to asphalt once it appeared, and it would have been a large part of India's ecosystem for millions of years. I mean really, how are you going to get rid of a snake that's longer than a double-decker? Well, the answer to that, my friends, is good old Mother Nature, the final boss for pretty much most species. As stated, one of the reasons why Vasuki evolved in the first place was thanks to a special wombo combo of conditions, including a bountiful ecosystem and the warm temperatures of the Eocene, which also had numerous events of intense heat spikes sprinkled throughout it. So, the snakes got lucky, while many other groups actually perished during these heat spells. But, as you can imagine, their luck eventually ran out. And as the Eocene progressed and the Oligocene approached, the world resumed a cooling shift that had been generally a global trend for some time, with worldwide carbon dioxide levels slowly lowering. And along with getting a bit chillier, the atmosphere started to get a wee bit drier as well. So here you have a giant snake that needs warmth and a wet, swampy home, and now both of these factors were getting stripped away. Suffice to say, the clock was ticking for our boy. And lo and behold, before the Eocene had ended, about 33.9 million years ago, this serpent had disappeared from the fossil record, becoming just one more lost relic of time, and serving as a reminder that the planet is always changing. However, while the Vasuki Indicus might be gone for good, its legacy would live on for some time through its family, who did lose overall steam during the Eocene, but managed to persist in various places, including India. And their stories would continue all the way up to just 12,000 years ago, which was basically yesterday. And let me tell you, many of them, not just the Indicus, were some bad cookies. So if you want to learn more about them, go check out an older video I made on them. Thanks for watching, and until
Yeah, interesting. Similar in size to Titanoboa, but more specialized on hunting on land and hunting reptiles, big reptiles as well as mammals. So I think I want to watch the Vividends video next. Yeah, definitely.
Which dinosaurs could survive the modern day? We're going to be simulating a realistic Jurassic Park, taking 5 dinosaur species and putting them in Chobe National Park in Botswana, Africa. We'll look at how they feed themselves, adapt to the environment, and interact with native species to see which ones are sustainable in a national park simulation. In our scenario, we've successfully sequenced the genomes of these 5 dinosaurs, recreating them in breeding populations and unleashing those adults upon this national park. Which ones will successfully integrate into the ecosystem of modern Africa, and which ones will either die off or threaten to destroy it? To understand how our dinosaurs will live in the park, we need to understand the environment we're placing them in. Chobe National Park is an enormous wildlife refuge, currently measuring 4,500 square miles. It includes huge floodplains, woodlands, ephemeral rivers, and grasslands, providing warm, humid territory across multiple biomes. Common trees in the woodlands include Afzelia quinzensis, which produce large flowers and seed pods.
You say I like this one. This one's a good one. Like the 4 meme. I like this one. No, but jokes aside, obviously Isaac makes most of his videos are really, really good. And when I say most, I mean that sometimes the topic I don't. Most of them are very interesting, like Spec Evo, like the newest news as well. But you can't really, what's it called? You can't really get, well, let's put it this way. Not everyone does have the same interest, so you can't have 100% subscriber or viewer rates, I guess.
Reach up to 20 meters, or 65.6 feet tall. Baikiea, or African teak, is another common tree, with leaves and seeds much lower to the ground. We can also expect to see acacias, or Vachelia carew, which might not be the best options for herbivorous dinosaurs given their thorny coverings. Smaller trees and bushes with softer leaves cover the area, providing sufficient dietary options. The biodiversity in Chobe National Park, which we are retitling as Chobe Prehistoric Park, is incredible. We can see multiple species of antelope in the woodlands and floodplains that dominate the northern sector of the park, including sable antelope and puku antelope. They're joined by larger herbivores like Cape buffalo, terrifyingly dangerous animals by the way, which can weigh between 400 and over 800 kilograms for the big males. Angolan giraffes, a subspecies of southern giraffes, also hang out here. Fully grown adults range between 4 and nearly 6 meters tall at the head, with masses between 800 and 1200 kilograms. They use their camouflage and size to defend themselves against predators by keeping their vitals up high and their devastating kicks low. We also see African bush elephants here in significant numbers, and we will throughout nearly the entire park. Approximately 50,000 bush elephants call Chobe Prehistoric Park home, and adults range
50,000 bush elephants. Yeah, let's get the theropods in, guys. Like also the theropods that can hunt these baddies. Yeah, I feel sorry for the elephants, but I know this would be great entertainment. By the way, sometimes you don't say anything even though you're talking. Ah, yeah, that must be like some frames the mic doesn't get. Sometimes maybe even seconds that are not recorded.
In size from 2.6 meters tall at the shoulder and 3 metric tons for fully grown females, all the way to 3.2 meter shoulder height and 6 metric tons for a typical fully grown male. Larger individuals are rare, but they do occur. Out of a sample size of hundreds of thousands of individuals, the biggest elephant ever recorded had a shoulder height of 3.96 meters and is estimated to have weighed over 10 metric tons. Of note is that the low calcium plants here do result in very brittle tusks for Chobe elephants. Elephants are also common in the marshland areas, which are also home to both black and white rhinos, zebras, giant antelope like kudu and wildebeest, and even the charismatic universally beloved warthog. The predator profile here is much more relevant to a conversation about dinosaurs. Now and again we see cheetahs, the fastest living land animal, occasionally spotted hyenas, gregarious clever hunters with powerful bites, and even lion prides. Nile crocodiles, African leopards, and wild dogs also occur in the northern marshes. This gives you a good idea of the threats and competition that our artificially resurrected dinosaurs will have to face in order to successfully integrate into the park. Let's start with Carnotaurus sastrae, our medium game hunter. Carnotaurus lived in Argentina in the late Cretaceous period. While far from megatheropod status, it would be a
Medium game hunter hunting bison, probably. It's by far the biggest predator if you were to get it into Chobe Prehistoric Park.
gigantic terrestrial predator by today's standards, at about 8 meters long and 2 tons, 10 times the mass of a large male lion. It's also 2.5 meters tall at the hip, filling in missing pieces of the lower leg from close relatives. The idea that it was a speed demon comes from reconstructing the tibia and feet from other belosaurids. In this scenario, the genetic voodoo we performed bears that out, and we've observed Carnotaurus in our enclosures running as quickly as 25 miles an hour, or 40 kilometers an hour. Their avian-like respiratory system ensures that oxygen-rich air is always running across their lungs even when they're not inhaling. When they inhale, fresh air is divided between their lungs and the posterior air sac. As they exhale, old air leaves through the throat, and the fresh air from the posterior air sac goes across the lungs into the anterior air sac, where it waits for the next exhalation to be removed from the body. This gives theropods far more endurance when it comes to running and combat than mammals. To exemplify this point, lions can only maintain high speed and activity for less than a minute. Ostriches, which are about the same body mass on average, can run at close to top speed for up to 20 minutes at a time. So yeah, Carnotaurus would be, in technical terms, a frickin' menace. The horned theropod coexisted with a variety of other large animals in La Colonia Formation, which is from the very end of the Cretaceous. The crocodiles, small mammals, fish, and turtles of Chobe would be fairly familiar to Carnotaurus. It competed with Colecan, another belosaurid close to its own size when fully grown, and would have hunted the hadrosauroids, possibly ankylosaurs, and young titanosaurs that it lived with, along with any small animals in the area. Studies on its jaws and skull go back and forth on its specialization, indicating that it may have been an accomplished generalist capable of taking down prey in a wide body size range.
Look at this head. It can open it wide and snap. Quickly close it. In other words, you don't wanna go there really. To Chobe Prehistoric Park, you wanna watch it like from far away.
Bite force studies indicate an anterior or front of the jaw bite force of approximately 3,400 newtons, compared to an adult lion's anterior bite force of 1,700 newtons. The sheer size of Carnotaurus' skull enables it to deliver crippling bites to animals as big as Cape buffalo or even small elephants.
Yeah. Nanotyrannus is one of the speedsters. It makes sense, but then it would be another Tyrannosaur, of course. And they want to have like a big theropod, likely Tyrannosaurus. In my opinion, I want to see, of course, Carnotaurus, my favorite megatheropod right now. But it won't be him.
While it's fast, it certainly isn't capable of catching antelope in a dead sprint. Wildebeest, according to some sources, can hit 50 miles or 80 kilometers an hour, twice the estimated top speed of Carnotaurus. Warthogs can hit 30 miles or 48 kilometers an hour, comparable.
I've heard some estimates around 56 kilometers per hour for Carnotaurus, so it seems like they've been not patched, but nerfed.
The most reports for Cape buffalo. Even giraffes have a top speed of at least 31 miles or 49 kilometers an hour. That one doesn't really come as a surprise though. Look at those ridiculous legs. That leaves elephants as the slowest megamammal in the area. Reports of 25-mile-an-hour sprinters appear to be severely exaggerated, with the fastest reliably recorded elephant being a young Asian bull who only hit 15 miles or 24 kilometers an hour while sprinting. So Carnotaurus could easily catch up to an elephant, but I'd argue it doesn't quite have the equipment necessary to deal with an adult up close. At best, it could snatch juveniles if the herd isn't paying attention. The best course then is to function as an ambush predator in the woodlands surrounding densely trafficked waterways, using the terrain to conceal itself before bursting out and capturing buffalo or wildebeest. Although, to be fair, if a Carnotaurus were chasing an antelope over a long distance, its significantly more efficient oxygen processing would allow it to eventually tire out the mammal through persistence hunting. A mixture of these tactics would give it access to the calories it needs, leading to a stable population of powerful marathon runner carnivores 10 times the size of the largest native land predators. Stegosaurus is our first herbivore on the list. It's the size of an elephant itself, with fully grown adults reaching around 7 meters long and 5 metric tons. Rather than tusks, they have thagomizers, 3-foot or 1 meter long tail spikes that have been shown to puncture bone. Their range of motion is also horrifying, with biomechanical models of the closely related Kentrosaurus demonstrating a scorpion-like reach on the tail spikes. I don't see any native predators, even lions, frequently making Stegosaurus a target, just like how hunting adult elephants is extremely rare and almost always done in prides. It's just far too dangerous. That leaves food and water. Hydration is freely available in Chobe thanks to the huge riverways and marshes. As a low browser, it will focus its foraging on bushes and low-hanging seed pods. A 2016 Bite Force study found it had a stronger bite than previously thought, and likely could have eaten hard wood, opening up the menu considerably. That means that high-calorie seed pods could plausibly form a considerable portion of the Stegosaurus' new diet. Trackways demonstrate that Stegosaurids likely lived in herds with individuals of different ages, which would provide protection for smaller dinos that are still getting the swing of their thagomizers. Stegosaurus seems like it would thrive, honestly. But before we move on to the Tyrannosaurus in the room, I'd like to suggest that if you enjoy the idea of dinosaurian megafauna in the modern day, you might like psychic dinosaurs as battle steeds in a war between ancient civilizations. That's the core concept of my book Extinction Obsidian Dawn, which is the first in a series. It's available in ebook and hardcover on Amazon, Ingram Spark, and Kobo. The links are in the pinned comment. Now
Check that out if you're interested, guys, as always.
onto the Mesozoic's most physically powerful land predator, Tyrannosaurus. It's known from the woodlands and bayous of Hell Creek and the coastal floodplains of the Lance and Northhorn formations. Overall, that's similar to range Chobe Park. Juvenile and subadult Tyrannosaurus material like Bucky and Terry indicates that
But adding Carnotaurs makes it more diverse because, yeah, exactly. Yeah, personally, I just want to be different. So if I did the selection for the video, I'd probably go for because we're in North America here. Not North America, Joby. Africa here. You could opt for Carnotaurs. You could opt then for an Abelisaur, a Megaraptoran, and your maybe another smaller theropod, or even omnivore from the theropod clade, like a Solorosaur. And then you got your Stegosaur or Ankylosaur. You got your Iguanodontian or your goddammit Hadrosaur, yeah, and a Sauropod. Well, the Sauropod thing, I don't know, because do we really have enough food for a herd?
robust skulls and bodies were already developing in the early to mid-teens for T-Rex. Young Rexes likely would have been faster than Carnotaurus given their heavily muscled legs and tails and long tibiae. They'd be most likely to prey on wildebeest and buffalo, leveraging their speed and biting power to scare herds into panics and crunch the stragglers. Ambush tactics are of course preferred, but young Rex's combo of speed and endurance could let them capture fleet-footed prey. Elephants are where things get interesting. They're enormous, intelligent, tusked group animals that typically use their size and raw strength to push around any other critter dumb enough to mess with them. Sassy rhino? Get gored. Sassy lion? Get gored. Sassy zebra? Get gored. Sassy... okay, you get the point. But would their size-based power and intimidation work as well against an animal the same size as them? Wait, hold on, let me check the data. Bigger, actually. A fully grown Tyrannosaurus is much bigger than a typical fully grown elephant. Skeletal maturity in fossil dinosaurs is assessed by checking to see if an animal has an external fundamental system, or EFS. That's a line of growth rings that are extremely close together, indicating that the animal has functionally stopped getting any larger. Out of the 15 T-Rex specimens that have had histology done, only 4 of them appeared to be fully grown adults. Trix at 24 to 30 years old and 9.5 tons, Scotty at 23 to 27 years old and 10.5 tons, Sue at 28 years old and at least 11 tons when not shrink-wrapped, and Cope at 30 years old and somewhere far north of 11 tons. That's a bare minimum fully grown average of 10.5 tons, but it's almost certainly higher given the unrealistically low masses used for both Sue and Cope. They were both likely over 12 tons, but more on that when SVP embargoes are over. Adult African bush elephants, when fully grown and combining male and female populations, average 5,250 kilograms. That's exactly half the value of an average adult Rex. So not only do they now have to deal with predators as big as they are, they're dealing with predators twice their size. Even the Rex specimens we explicitly know were immature, like MOR 555, which had completed most of its growth as a later teenager and was already over 9 tons, would be huge threats. But
A good part 2 for the video could be like the speculative evolution of the animals integrated in this ecosystem, and also the speculative evolution or spec evo of the animals that are currently living here over time, because they will have to adapt.
Tyrannosaurus wasn't only much larger than an African bush elephant, it was also faster. A 2024 muscle-driven analysis found that MOR 555 could likely move at between 17 and 23 miles an hour, or 27 to 38 kilometers an hour, faster than most humans can sprint and significantly faster than any elephant. It could also keep that pace up for far longer than elephants. I really don't know why people debate T-Rex versus elephant still. Looking at the hip height difference between two average fully grown individuals, Rex is at the perfect height to crush muscle and bone from virtually any angle. It could maul the hindquarters as the much smaller herbivore attempts to flee. It could snap the tusks from the front, something we know it did to Triceratops horns. It could bite through the neck with a fatal blow from the side, and given how it's much faster than an elephant and its foot structure would mask the vibrations from its movements, an ambush would be devastating. Funnily enough,
Have you not seen the biggest trees in Africa? No, I haven't. Elephants can't even reach the tops of them. Yeah, they're big, but not that big. Well, very big, but they're not 20 plus meters or 15 plus meters in height, I guess. And they probably also can't, or at least for some trees, they can't knock them over like sauropods did. Yeah, that would be a good idea. You know, if they did that in this video, I don't think so, because the video is only well, not only, but for the concept that, or the idea, it's too short, this video.
the rangers here had considered a cull of elephants because they were causing too much
That's another disconnection, I guess, from the...
damage to the plant life.
Yeah, another disconnection from the headphones.
Rangers here had considered a cull of elephants because they were causing too much damage to the plant life, and introducing a family of Rexes would accomplish that very purpose. 50,000 elephants could easily sustain a large nightmare of T-Rexes, letting them winnow down the population to manageable levels without wiping out the elephants. The young would likely learn from their parents while also taking down wildebeest and buffalo, the latter of which are essentially smaller, less dangerous Triceratops. I should also bring up that elephant herds are matriarchal, led by older females and chiefly composed of youngsters and their mothers. Elephant cows are much smaller than the bulls, to the point where they're dwarfed by teenage Rex specimens like Bucky. Their ability to effectively protect a herd from a nightmare of Rexes is perhaps not as great as one would initially assume, considering the absurd degree to which they're outmatched in the size and firepower departments. Therizinosaurus cheloniformis.
Yeah, the concept is very, very good, I actually think. So also thank you for the compliment, I guess. And but you can then also have like a greater selection of dinosaurs, and if you were to do spec evo for current animals and the animals you want to integrate in this park, then the video is gonna not just be half an hour long, it's gonna be like 45 minutes. Maybe even longer.
Is a 5 to 6 ton herbivorous theropod with gigantic claws. Its long neck and beak-like skull are perfect for grasping and processing tall branches. A 2023 biomechanical study found that its famous claws wouldn't have been able to hold up structurally if used as digging tools or predator defense weapons. They stated that our FSA failed to support any previous functional assumptions requiring considerable stress bearing, including digging earth, gripping and ripping branches, attacking prey or predators, and even climbing trees. Hence, the FSA results instead suggest functions rarely requiring stress bearing, such as exhibition, intimidation, or sexual display. It may have been able to use its claws in defense once, but they simply weren't cut out for high-impact activities like swiping. That being said, 3-foot claws on an animal as tall as a giraffe is something that Cenozoic Africa has never seen before, and it's unlikely that the native predators of Chobe would get too close to a Therizinosaurus if they can help it. It would likely eat much of the same plant life as giraffes, but
Some animations he's using, they're killing me inside.
focusing on taller trees and hanging around areas with plenty of water. Their biggest threat, rather than lions or hyenas, would actually be the Tyrannosaurus population released into the park. Considering the smaller Tarbosaurus is known to have dined on Dinocyrus, an ornithomimid even bigger than Therizinosaurus, Theri is probably on the menu for the Tyrant Lizard King. Paralotitan stromeri was a titanosaur from Cretaceous North Africa. Emphasis on Paralotitan.
Yes, yes. Another animal from Cretaceous Africa.
This sauropod was 22 to 25 meters long and would have weighed 30 to 44 tons, standing 12 to 14 meters tall at the head. An animal 2 to 3 times the height of a giraffe and 15 to 20 times the weight is not to be messed with, especially when it can squish you into a pancake with a single stomp. As a saltosaurian, it may have had osteoderm armor, which would have been used in life either as A. additional defense against large theropods like Carnotaurs, B. calcium sequestration structures to draw upon in lean times, or C. both. If it takes a pack of, say, 20 lions to take down a 5-ton elephant, you won't find a single pride in all of Africa large enough to realistically fight the fully grown Paralititan we'd be introducing to Chobe Park. They'd also have a niche that doesn't seem occupied in modern Africa. They could eat the tops of baobab trees, which are mostly trunk and grow up to 30 meters or 98 feet tall. The leaves and nutritious seeds could prove to be a useful resource for adults, while the young would be browsing at similar levels as giraffes. The problem is that the native mega-herbivores, elephants, were already causing overgrazing issues, although admittedly they weren't targeting the incredibly tall trees that titanosaurian sauropods would be. One way to adjust that is to increase the amount of tyrannosaurs introduced in the park, placing several nightmares each in the woodlands, marshlands, and floodplains in order to ensure the existence of an apex predator that can manage dinosaurian herbivores. While Tyrannosaurus didn't have the ridiculously wide gape and long jaws of allosaurids that specialized in taking down sauropods, it was big and powerful enough to still deal lethal blows if necessary, and was much more agile than its distant cousins. They'd pick off young and injured Paralititan when the elephants weren't available, perhaps even preferentially. Stegosaurus, on the other hand, is simply more trouble than it's worth. Approximately the same size as a small Triceratops, Stegosaurus's ridiculous range of motion with its tail spikes would keep even the most seasoned Tyrannosaurus on its toes. I'm not going to pretend that it's some invincible juggernaut of an herbivore, but it was absurdly dangerous, and could absolutely deal out wicked damage to any potential predator. Tyrannosaurus, given its agility, would likely fare better against Stego than Allosaurids did, but in an environment where elephants exist as much easier prey, it would go for the big mammal every time. To sum up, we have Carnotaurs acting as a medium-sized ambush predator in the northern woodlands of Chobe, focusing on wildebeest and buffalo. We have Stegosaurus, eating low-growing bushes and foliage as a cantankerous giant, likely in fairly small numbers given the degree of competition it would face from browser antelope. Tyrannosaurus is the apex predator, keeping the elephant population under control and also taking a bite out of large wildebeest herds. Therizinosaurus hangs out with the giraffes, eating tall plant growth, and Paralititan goes for the incredibly tall trees that nobody else can reach, with the ever-present Tyrannosaur threat keeping them from decimating the park. Naturally, this complex dynamic of once extinct ruling reptiles attracts an incredible amount of tourism. Chobe Prehistoric Park lodges offer a thrilling experience. They're described as being in the true wilderness, out in the center of the vast ecosystems that exist here. Security had to be upgraded a notch when we introduced dinosaurs, of course, with the lodges themselves having bullet-resistant windows, steel frames, and underground shelters with enough supplies and energy sources to outlast a Tyrannosaur stakeout. The price of park admission, as low as $2,000 a night, includes access to a 24/7 crack security team, transport in armored vehicles, and remote drone-powered surveillance to scout out potentially dangerous areas. Driving into a known Tyrannosaur hunting event is forbidden, although Carnotaurs are considered low enough of threats to observe from a safe distance. Feeding the dinosaurs or other animals is forbidden. Flash photography of dinosaurs is forbidden. Offering yourself as a sacrifice to the Tyrannosaurs is forbidden. It comes up a lot for some reason. Remember to check out Extinction Obsidian Dawn using the links in the pinned comment. What are your thoughts on dinosaurs surviving in a nature reserve like this one?
Bringing yourself as a sacrifice for a Tyrannosaurus meal is crazy. Yeah, a nice advert kinda for not just Chobe Prehistoric Park, but also Chobe National Park, I guess. And I think that's gonna be it for me today. We've covered a lot of videos today. I think like 5 or 6. I think 6 videos actually. Crazy. I think that's been the longest stream, but I'm still quite busy. And it will be better after vocational school, but still. There is a good chance I will do another poll for another stream or for another potential stream next week. So watch out for that. And guys, thank you for tuning in. Have a good day or night. All right. Peace out.